Thank you, Julian. We'll make a start, everyone. It's just gone 7 o'clock. So my name's Neil Lawrenson, and I'm chairing the meeting in the absence of Councillor Jabba Riaz, who's unfortunately had to go and see his dad in hospital. So thinking of you, Jabba and Mohammed, get well soon. I'm going to read out a short introduction, if that's okay. The meeting's been recorded. So the public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on today's proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photography or photographing, making audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. As I've just said, the meeting has been recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you're deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds in the Guildhall, we must evacuate immediately. Do not spend time collecting any personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed, and once you've left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. So thank you for bearing with me on that one. Julian, do you have any substitutes for this evening's meeting?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, we do. We've just got one substitute, and that's Elaine Wilmore. She's here for Bashar Ali.
Thank you very much. And are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Petrovsky, then Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. My employer, Platform Housing Group, is mentioned in at least a couple of reports. I thought I'll bring it to your attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a member of Bike Worcester. I'm not sure it's particularly relevant, but because the Chair of Bike Worcester is speaking, I just thought I'd mention it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Collier.
In that case, I'll do the same.
Okay. Thank you. I'm assuming that's all noted. We've got 3 speakers from the public, but before I invite the first speaker to step forward, I was wondering if it'd be possible to slightly change the agenda so that the Coma Gardens Institute item is brought forward, because I believe that many of the people in the public gallery are particularly interested in that item. So I'm looking for councillors to nod their head in agreement with that. So Coma Gardens Institute will be the first substantial item we'll discuss tonight, as opposed to parking it at the end. Is that okay? Because then, I mean, if you're a political nerd like I am, you'll stay for the whole thing, but I probably won't want to go to the pub afterwards. So we'll do that then. So we'll have the 3, I've got 3 public speakers. Is that correct, Julian?
Yes.
Yeah. And then we will discuss the Coma Gardens paper, which would have been agenda item 10, but is no longer the case. So our first speaker on my list is Rhiannon Clark, who'd like to speak in support of the Coma Gardens Institute's Capital Investment Business Case Report. I'm just looking at my notes again. Each speaker has up to 5 minutes, so I'm going to get my stopwatch. Okay. Or I won't do that. An officer will just nod at me. I'm very pedantic. Okay, good luck, Rhiannon. Over to you.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Rhiannon Clark, and I am speaking as a member of the Committee of Coma Gardens Hall Association, a charitable organisation established by a group of local residents that provides a valued and well-utilised facility for the local community. Coma Gardens Community Hall has a rich history, initially used by Coma Gardens School before becoming the community hall as we know it today. After the pandemic, a new group of volunteers were required to step up to ensure the longevity of Coma Gardens Community Hall. And since establishing this new committee, we have been actively working to improve the building for the community, promoting awareness of the community space and of the wide variety of activities available. The new generation of the committee is striving to improve and modernise operations and has already installed a defibrillator on the front of the building, added a key safe to improve access, introduced a new pricing structure to support small community groups, implemented a booking and payment system, created a website and have begun to develop a social media presence. We have identified an exciting opportunity to meet the needs of the community in the development of the upstairs space, previously occupied and since left in a state of disrepair. As requested by the City Council, the committee have created a business case that details the current operations of the community hall and outlines how increasing the space available would be a unique opportunity to transform this building into a thriving, diverse community hub. In addition to this opportunity, we have also been granted the garden space and have great visions to create a welcoming environment for the community to connect with nature in activities such as gardening and outdoor learning. As part of forming this business case, we engaged with members of the local community to understand the local demographic, gather feedback, and further get to know their needs. One of the findings that really stood out was that of the 51% of respondents who don't currently use the hall, 92% would like to join a group or activity. This demonstrates a significant need for an expanded community hub that can facilitate an increased variety of activities, helping people to be active, improve their health and well-being, and tackle loneliness, things that are not possible with the current limitations of space and availability. We would like to thank the council officers and management for all of their work in supporting our development of the business case and urge committee members to support the recommendation tonight to move ahead and conclude this gateway decision for Coma Gardens Community Hall. We, as the community, pledge to source the funds to close the gap in estimated costs for the project and will work with the officers and the community to ensure its success. With your support, we can transform the community hall into a space that can truly benefit the local community and meet significant unmet needs. As a new, enthusiastic and dedicated group of volunteers, we are committed to improving this heritage building, both for the current and future generations of the community. Thank you for allowing me to speak this evening and reinforce our commitment to work together to make this exciting project happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhiannon. So we have two more public speakers. Our next speaker is Dan Brothwell, who would like to speak with regards to dangerous cycling.
Thank you.
Just to say, you also got 5 minutes, sorry.
5 minutes, yes. Yeah, not necessarily talking about dangerous cycling, possibly more the lack of it. But thank you for your time. I'm Dan Brothwell, Chair of Bike Worcester. I'd like to talk about the PSPO being discussed this evening, in particular the element associated with the prohibition of dangerous cycling and skateboarding. Bike Worcester exists to enable and encourage more people to travel by bike in the city. In this regard, we're perfectly aligned with central government policy, which is targeting 50% of journeys to be by walking and cycling by 2030. And we're pleased that this is now acknowledged in the City Active Travel Plan, the County Council Active Travel Stakeholder Forum, and will no doubt be acknowledged in the LC Whip currently being developed for the city and in LTP5 when it's produced. My understanding is that increasing rates of active travel is desirable to all of the political parties locally and to everyone in this room. Given all of this, let's focus our efforts on discussing how we achieve our goals. With regard to the PSPO, the officer report points out that the dangerous cycling and skateboarding can be enforced anyway under other legislation, and that in fact the PSPO has proven not to be enforceable with regards to officers being unable to stop moving traffic, and that fixed penalty notices can't be issued to minors. The decision made tonight is an opportunity to align the policy of enabling and encouraging more active travel with decisions made here in this room, and to send a message to the residents of the city and people watching from further afield that there are deliberate, evidence-based decisions being made to improve the city and increase rates of cycling and walking. I use my bike most days travelling in and around the city, and I still look at the PSPO signs with irritation. Make no mistake, they are a psychological barrier to people choosing to travel by bike. It has the potential to instill the sense of wrongdoing, despite cycling perfectly legally, cause a change of route, possibly reducing safety for the rider, and cause additional conflict with other road users, all of which can lead to the choice being made to not travel by bike. This is the opposite of what we're all trying to achieve with our overarching policies and decisions. I'm not going to stray into whataboutery, but my understanding is the PSPO exists as a result of concerns of safety or danger, of antisocial behaviour, of illegal behaviour caused by moving vehicles. I would welcome a forum to have a serious discussion about these issues and how they affect the city with all relevant stakeholders. I appreciate tonight isn't the opportunity to do that. This needs to be done setting aside emotion, any party politics, any inflammatory sensationalist rhetoric, and any anecdotal evidence, and instead to do the boring work of looking at the available data, be that police reports on the CrashMap website, county council traffic surveys, or the data available from vehicle-activated speed signs which have recently been installed across the city. If people in this room genuinely care about road safety, also called road danger, also called road violence in the city, there's an elephant in the room that isn't being discussed, namely cars and how they are driven, which are responsible for the vast majority of damage, destruction, injury and death on our roads. In summary, I encourage you all to make the decision to discontinue the PSPO with regard to dangerous cycling and skateboarding this evening, and let's put behind us the period where choosing a bike as a mode of transport in the city has been derided, and instead choosing the efficient and healthy option is encouraged and celebrated. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Dan. Just before I bring forward the next speaker, just a couple of acronyms there. Can correct me if I'm wrong, but LTP5 is Local Transport Plan 5, just for in case anyone's watching and doesn't know those acronyms. Stand for PSPO, which we'll be talking about later this evening, Public Space Protection Order. That's what PSPO stands for. So thanks again, Dan. And I'd like to bring forward Alex Mace, who likewise will speak in support of getting rid of the PSPO against dangerous cycling and skateboarding. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. I am here this evening to give my support to scrapping the dangerous cycling and skateboarding PSPO across the city centre. PSPOs require that identified restrictions are reasonable, will prevent the activity occurring and are justifiable. I believe that this PSPO failed to satisfy these conditions. The report states that enforcement of the PSPO is difficult as officers can only restrain or stop someone if it is safe to do so, i.e. the very act of cycling dangerously makes it impossible to stop the person responsible. It is a pity that there are no statistics provided on the number of stops enforcement officers would have made if they had been felt able to safely stop the person responsible. So, as it is currently set up, the PSPO cannot prevent the activity occurring. The PSPO restrictions are not reasonable or justifiable because the evidence simply does not support that there being a problem with dangerous cycling in the city centre or anywhere else. On average, 3 pedestrians a year in the UK, in the whole country, are killed by cyclists. Every one of those events is something to be regretted and reasonable steps considered to prevent a repeat. But I would hope we can agree that it would be absurd to ban everything that kills 3 or more people per year. We would certainly need to ban drivers in cars, as nearly 100 times more, 285 pedestrians are killed by cars or drivers in cars every year. Yet they are allowed in the pedestrianised areas of Worcester for 18 hours a day. The city centre PSPO cannot be enforced and does not achieve what it was set out to do. This committee should follow the recommendation and not extend the dangerous cycling and skateboarding PSPO. This is not to say that cancelling the PSPO is job done. There are positive changes that can be made that will improve walking and cycling locally for everybody. As part of this, I want to highlight the Worcester Women's Cycle Project that was released by Bike Worcester last week for International Women's Day. If you go to the Bike Worcester website, you can find it linked right from the top. This project brought together the stories and experiences of over 100 women who cycle in Worcester and look at what some of the challenges are for women cycling in the city, including aggressive drivers, intimidating behaviour, drivers shouting abuse, catcalls and offensive comments, roads that feel dangerous, and fear of cycling in car traffic. I've personally been abused by a driver for the simple act of cycling the half-mile home from my children's school with my children. So my positive suggestion is this. The report under 5.14 mentions that stakeholders have asked for a shared space scheme instead of a PSPO. And I want to endorse that, but also ask that drivers, in addition to cyclists and pedestrians, be included in any shared space messaging. I am a driver, cyclist and pedestrian myself, and I think it is entirely reasonable to ask all three to be respectful and mindful of others, with the most asked of those who are least vulnerable on the road. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you to Dan and Rhiannon. All three of you will receive a written response after the meeting, just to make you aware. So thanks again for coming to tonight's meeting. As I said, we brought forward the agenda item on Coma Gardens, but before we get to that, we just will need to hopefully agree the minutes from the previous Communities Committee meeting, which was on the 31st of January. So I'll just take it page by page, sort of points of accuracy or any other issues. Page 1. Page 2. Oh, Tom. Councillor Petrovsky, excuse me.
That's okay. There is a spelling mistake in the name of Karen Brian McGinley. He wouldn't forgive me if I didn't mention this because I'm his parishioner. I better say that then. So it's an E rather than A in McGinley.
I will correct that. Thank you.
Excellent pedantry, well done. I really do appreciate that. Any more corrections, points of accuracy? Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5. Page 6. And page 7. And we all agree that's an accurate record of the previous meeting? Great. Definitely need to stick arms in the air. We just nod. I'm just checking. Thank you. So, what was agenda item 10 is now agenda item something or other. Coma Gardens Institute Capital Investment Business Case Report. So I'm going to open up for debate. Just before I do so, just thought it'd be helpful to summarise the recommendations, although I'm not going to do that actually, because someone's advised me not to do that. I'll do that at the end. I won't steal their thunder. An officer whose name I've clearly forgotten is going to present the report, and then I will recap the recommendations. Apologies.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Kevin Moore, Head of Property and Asset Management. Coma Hall Gardens Institute, for those who aren't familiar with the building, two-storey, standalone two-storey building, ground floor. It's a community hall with kitchen facilities that has been used by the Coma Hall Gardens Hall Association, and the first floor was last used as a one-bedroom flat and has been vacant for a number of years since it's handed back to us by Platform Housing Association, or we took it back off Platform Housing Association, and is in a pretty poor state of repair. This committee, Communities Committee, has previously recommended and approved the principle of the conversion of the first floor to extend community facilities, and Policy Resources Committee and Council has approved, put in £140,000 in the capital programme for this purpose, subject to the approval of a full business case. So this report takes the full business case for consideration by this committee. So looking at the technical aspects, we've worked with the Community Hall Garden Association, their committee, to look at the best way of adapting the first floor to provide community facilities. A principal point of that is to be able to allow dancing to take place on the first floor, and that would free up the ground floor for an extension of wider community use, and that obviously has an implication for the costs of doing so. But we've worked through the technical details of that taken advice from a structural engineer. So those plans have been drawn up and costed at today's costs at £168,000, which of course exceeds the capital programme allowance. I would add that we've worked very hard to reduce that cost, and in getting that figure down as far as we can, there's elements of self-help by the Community Halls Association for what we'd be happy for them to do. On looking at the legal aspects, we've worked with the committee, as Rhiannon outlined in her address. We have a new set, there's a new set of trustees and officers in position. There's a great deal of enthusiasm there. Everything's in order. Planning consent would be needed for the change of use, and there would also be a need to redo the tenancy agreement that they currently have, which is a very sort of temporary, informal arrangement. The Community Association themselves, as Rhiannon addressed, has worked through and produced a business plan, having surveyed existing users and residents in the area about to confirm the potential and how to establish that there is a need and certainly a demand for taking up the extension of facilities here, and has produced income and cost forecasts which shows that income would be sufficient to cover the usual outgoings. As part of the business case, we've had to consider other options for the use of the first floor, and the obvious one would be to spend money in terms of to convert that back or to refurbish that back to a flat, which would be a cheaper option, but obviously would deny the extension of community facilities. And we feel there are legitimate grounds, and a lot of this is based on kind of precedent and what's happened previously, for the incompatibility and safeguarding issues raised by the use of the first floor as residential accommodation, being in conflict with a kind of wider community use, and particularly use by younger persons. So this report, in balance, this report recommends that the project proceeds, and that the capital programme allocation is kind of used for this purpose. Clearly the project is not able to proceed until the shortfall in funds is made up. So the recommendation is to approve that project proceeds, subject to the shortfall in funds being made up by the Hall Association through fundraising or through application to grants elsewhere, and that we set a timescale of 2 years for them to be able to do that and come back to be able to confirm that they're in a position to proceed. The second element is obviously that planning permission would need to be obtained and any other strategic consents. And finally, it's subject to agreeing a new tenancy agreement, and part of that tenancy agreement would be a formal community use agreement to guarantee the wide use of the facilities created. That's the recommendation.
Thank you, Kevin. Just noticed Warwick and Rosina have stepped forward. Do you want to speak on this item? No?
Questions, Chair.
Yeah.
You have the questions.
Okay. Thank you. So, yeah, I'm going to open it up for questions, comments about the paper in front of us. I will do what I said I was going to do, just to summarise. We're essentially talking about converting the first floor of Comer Gardens Institute, which is in St Clement's Ward, for an extension of the community hall. So we heard a case in favour of this at the beginning of the meeting. And we're also discussing the £28,000 shortfall in the budget, whether we agree to the measures by which we would bridge that gap. So in my head, those are the two main things that we're about to discuss. So I've got Councillor Lawrence would like to start the debate. Councillor Lamb. Yeah, I've got two so far. There will be another opportunity. Carry on, Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. My main concern is it seems to pivot very much on one single source of income, being the dance school. And it's good that we've got a viable, but it's almost like the whole premises is sort of set up for themselves, and I'd like to see a bit more diversification, just in case something happens and the dance school's not working for some reason, that it's going to be pivotal to their income. So I would be a little bit of reservation about that, although it seems to have quite a good income from that. It is based on almost a single source.
Okay.
Chair,
thank
do you want me
yes,
just to-
response to that?
That's a fair point, but every community centre tends to have an anchor use, and it provides the sustainability going forward. You know, the purpose of the community use agreement would be to guarantee that the facilities are kind of open, guaranteed to be open for far more than that.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. And Councillor Lamb.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, I remember when this item came first before this committee a few years ago, and the irony is the advocate of this, which I think was Chris Mitchell at the time, is now obviously departed the political scene in Worcester. So this carries on as a kind of legacy project for him, I guess. I suppose a couple of things. Firstly, it'd just be interesting to know why the estimated cost is now, you know, almost £30,000 more than the original budget. Could be because of increased building costs which have happened post-COVID, I don't know, so it'd just be quite interesting to know why it's gone up. And secondly, what happens, you know, £28,000 over 2 years, I mean, that I don't know how easy or difficult that might be for Comer Gardens Hall Association to find, but what happens if the 2 years goes by and that figure has not been found? What then? What happens to the project?
On the first point, clearly there has been an awful lot of construction price inflation since the estimates were first put together, and obviously working with the Hall Association Committee, we've understood the full extent of alterations that would be required to the building, and big part of that is not just the strengthening of the floor, which was always anticipated, but it would be sensible to make sure that the ground floor and the first floor are actually accessible within the building. Currently, the first floor is only accessible by, for want of a better word, an external staircase. So it's the end result of a number of alterations that are necessary. Yeah, what happens in 2 years' time if we haven't got enough money? Then clearly it's a shame to have a moving target, but clearly the difference in cost has to be bridged. So, you know, if the authority is not willing to increase the amount in the capital programme, then clearly there's going to be a bigger gap to fill there.
Just on Councillor Lamb's second point, Chair, obviously the approval is clear, isn't it? It gives the association 2 years to find the gap, and if that gap isn't bridged, then we would need to come back, because there's still an investment decision to be taken on this building. The upstairs is unused; it's an opportunity cost. I think one of the things that we've been told by the committee is that, subject to agreement tonight, there are a number of grant applications waiting to be submitted. There may even be some submitted. So I think that's why it's critically important for the committee to receive a decision one way or the other. But we are told that, subject to approval, there are a number of bids waiting to be submitted.
Councillor Petrovsky, then Councillor Cooper. Yep, Councillor Petrovsky.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think in terms of whether we should support or not support the recommendation, it's a clear yes from me. It's a no-brainer. I think that the question to officers, to Kevin and whoever else is sort of inclined to provide some more light, what can we do to help this project to succeed in terms of advertising? The reason I'm asking is we're taking our own children to a dance activity just a mile or thereabouts from that activity. We've done quite an extensive research, and I must admit that only when I was reading the paperwork, I became aware of it. So I think there is a key role for the council to play in trying to help that enterprise to succeed. And I would welcome reassurance. It's not only about the kids. Who knows, I might take up some lane dancing. Always been a dream of mine.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cooper?
Thank you. I'm tickled by Tom's line dancing. I think there are not enough third spaces in the city, and by a third space, I mean somewhere that isn't your home or isn't where you work or go to school. Third spaces are really vital, and especially in a post-COVID world of people feeling isolated, I think we really need to invest in our third spaces, and I think from that we will get better community cohesion. I did have another point, but I can't remember. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Any other? Yep, Councillor Tesfaye.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question that might hook in with a later topic about the KPIs that are being debated and discussed. So where we've got this gap, this funding gap has arisen, where would that have been reported into to show that things were drifting, or, you know, it's here today as a figure? Would there have been indications en route to that, and where would they have appeared?
Chair, as this was a previous committee approval to draw up a business plan, what we're doing tonight is bringing that business plan back to members for the first time. So we wouldn't have ordinarily have reported that back through Shane's sort of regular financial update reports. And I suppose what we're doing tonight is that we're sticking to the £140,000 that's been previously approved and that's been built into the medium term financial plan. So yes, councillors, we wouldn't have ordinarily have reported that back as part of the financial report, monitoring reports. I don't know whether the Chair wants to add anything.
Through you, Chair, well, just to add that formally, under the Constitution and financial regulations, there is a limit on capital projects, and once capital projects exceed that amount, then it's reported to Policy and Resources Committee, formally. But, you know, because this is a project which is sponsored by this committee and is of interest to this committee, it will be receiving, no doubt, regular reports of progress, and that will include financial updates at the same time.
Oh, so that did happen then? That did happen in this case?
Sorry, Councillor, what happened?
So there were regular reports in between to show we're going wide. I'm just the process by which things are being tracked it's a principal question rather than particularly about the detail of this.
I understand. So this is the first time that we've brought back the detailed business case on this. So this is the first time that the committee has seen what the finances look like. So yeah, and that will be an ongoing process from now on, assuming it's approved, of course.
Councillor Cooper?
I remembered my part too.
Yeah,
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered if this was listed under the Find It, Do It section of the website, or if it could be enabled to support more people looking for venues. Thank you.
Okay. Any other councillor contributions before we revisit those recommendations, recap and go to a vote? I've just made a few notes, if that's okay. I'll share some thoughts. I'd personally be more concerned if there was a shortfall of £140,000. But the shortfall is £28,000. So over a 2-year period, that seems quite manageable to me. Heard a very enthusiastic speech at the beginning of the meeting, and Lloyd has mentioned grant funding. And in my day job, I see these types of grants come up time and time again. So I'm confident that if we were in agreement with this proposal, that grant funding, if it was to be applied for, would be successful in coming our way. I think this is a brilliant example of what this committee is all about, without sounding too worthy. It's a communities committee, and here we are talking about using a space for the community. as opposed to converting it into a private space. So it's a classic communities committee item, I would suggest. Finally, from myself at this point, well, I allude to the speech from Rhiannon at the beginning of the meeting, and clearly a lot of people are very enthusiastic about this because some of them are in the room, which in my 12 years of being on the council is quite unusual to have so many people on an item that isn't very contentious, in my view. So the strength of the feeling is evident in a positive way. I hope that's useful. Just scanning the room for any final. No. Okay, so I'm assuming everyone's got the papers in front of them. So there are 4 recommendations. The first one is simply to note the report, which is impossible not to do that. Secondly, to approve the business case for converting the first floor of Coma Gardens Institute for the extension of the community hall. Noting that there is a shortfall of £28,000, so the current estimated cost of converting the first floor is 168, whereas the provisional budget was £140,000. So we're noting that £28,000 shortfall. More fundamentally, we're approving the release of the £140,000 from the capital programme to support the conversion of that space. Being satisfied that the Coma Gardens Hall Association will have the money to bridge the £28,000 gap. The grant of all necessary regulatory consents has been secured, for example, planning consent, and acceptable terms will have been agreed regarding the lease, including community use agreement. So that's what we're about to vote on. I'm assuming that we're going to take those en masse. So all those in favour of the recommendations at the top of the report.
Chair, yes, that's unanimous.
All carried, yeah. Brilliant. Thank you very much to all officers involved and members of the public. Watch this space, literally. Look forward to it. Thank you. Okay. Thank you everyone for coming. Come again. So, go back to the agenda. So, agenda item number 5, which is the proposed committee performance scorecard for 2024-25. And I believe Shane is going to present this item. Over to you, Shane.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. And apologies for those who've sat through this once already or even twice. We're going to all of the committees to have the same discussion, and it's very much about gathering views and sharing some thoughts about how we might take this forward. This time of year, we review our scorecards for each of the committees and then start to think about what priorities and programmes and performance measures we will have in terms of going forward from June onwards when we set a programme for the new council. This year is slightly different because of the advent of the Office for Local Government, or OFLOG, and if you're not familiar with that, it's an organisation which has been set up by the department specifically, as it says here, to provide authoritative and accessible data and analysis about the performance of local government and support its improvement. So its focus at the moment is very much on performance indicators. And it's coming along in parallel with another initiative by the department, which is about resurrecting the sort of best value idea of continuous improvement. They've recently issued revised guidance on that, which the Local Government Association has responded to, and which we've been paying attention to through the Audit and Governance Committee. And we've also, for those who've been paying attention to the settlement, you will be aware that we had received some additional money post the settlement, but that came along with a commitment to produce a productivity plan to show the department how and what progress we're making in terms of meeting our financial performance. So there is a lot of emphasis at the moment coming from the centre about how well local authorities are performing, and it's very important that we're ahead of that, we're aware of it, and that we're able to demonstrate corporately that we're making progress and aren't in a position where we're likely to get a tap on the shoulder from somebody from the ministry saying, well, what are you up to then? You know, why is your performance not as good as others? So this creates a bit of an issue for me in terms of, well, how do we take our own performance management forward in a way which responds to that agenda, but which at the same time enables us to continue to manage our performance in things that are important to us and are important to us within our committee system that we have. And there are three ways that we can go with that. One is that we can continue to measure performance management at the committee level, and each committee looks at the matters within its own remit, and not have a sort of corporate overview. The alternative is that we do create a corporate overview, and then we put all our measurement of performance into that, and not have the same emphasis on performance management in the individual policy committees. And the third is that we do both. We have a corporate performance report presented to Policy and Resources Committee as a corporate committee, and continue to have performance measures at the individual policy committee level. The problem that this creates is the potential for a conflict between the Policy and Resources Committee and the policy committees, because you've got the same information going to two separate committees who may have different views about it and may get into a discussion. And that is something which we should try to avoid, apart from not wanting to duplicate effort. You never want to get into a position where you've got committees having the same information and potentially coming up with different answers. So what's proposed here, and my initial thinking the way through this, is something which is a slight compromise. So we do have a corporate performance management report which goes through to Policy and Resources Committee, and that the individual committees focus their bit of the scorecard on the priorities and projects which they've defined as important to them in terms of their work programme. But at the same time retain some of the performance indicators which support those agendas. So, for example, in this committee, one of the things listed in Appendix 2 is, let's say, delivery of housing enabling strategy and delivery plan, and therefore an important indicator that you might want to keep is the number of families in temporary accommodation, because that tells us how well we're doing in terms of providing sufficient accommodation for people within Worcester so that they don't need to use temporary accommodation. So what this is really designed to do, therefore, is to prompt a discussion about what performance indicators we think are important to this committee, and work our way to a position where when we come to June, we've got a clear idea about how we want to respond to this national agenda and create a corporate overview which we can all buy into and support, and at the same time retain focus in the committees and reorient focus in the committees onto the things which are really important to those committees. It's a proposal. The recommendation is to consider it. So nothing's set in stone. I'm simply seeking your views, and I'll collate all of those when we go forward and see how that looks in terms of a formal proposal when we're into the new municipal year. I'm happy to get any views or comments or questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Shane. Just try and invite people to indicate they want to speak. So yeah, there's two things. There's the change in approach to performance monitoring, and I'd invite views on the scorecard, the very colourful scorecard as well. So views on how we approach performance management, and specifically the scorecard at the end. If I could invite your views on those two things. I think Councillor Lamb indicated. Councillor Cooper. Okay, we'll see how we get on after you two. Councillor Lamb.
Thank you, Chair. And there is a little bit of a sense of déjà vu here, and I sat in on Environment Committee last night, and so some of the comments I'm going to make will be familiar from my colleague Councillor Cookson. But like Councillor Cookson last night, I do share some concerns about what is proposed here, because obviously the whole point about having a committee system is devolving decision making, involving as wide a range of councillors as possible. And for us to make those decisions, we need access to the widest range of information when we make those decisions, so we can have informed decisions. And I'm concerned about any proposal which kind of dilutes this principle and sort of gathers centrally information that should be devolved, because then that comes back, that starts to feel more like a cabinet system if there's a kind of star council in the middle which has the information, and that's removed from us, because I was a cabinet member under the old system and I remember what it was like and how ordinary councillors felt that they were being, you know, their power was being diminished. So I'm a bit concerned about any sort of gathering of information at the centre and away from the committees, because I really do believe that relevant committees such as communities should retain oversight over any information that is important for their policy area. And so the danger is in the report is that democratic oversight of core services is reduced, and this committee is relegated to only looking at priority projects and activities relevant to their functions. And there is stuff that's in the scorecard which I think is really, really important, such as affordable housing completion, such as the number of households on waiting lists, active participation in leisure and tennis in parks as well. All those kind of information I think is really, really important actually. So I think we need that information. I think it enables us to understand the pressure points in our particular sort of areas. It also means we can be sort of warned when things are likely to come up, to need more resources. So I would argue that we should reject the preferred option, and you know, there is a sort of middle way whereby we still have the KPIs as has been set out previously, but perhaps what we do is review them and ensure that the KPIs we are given are still relevant. So in principle, I think we should retain, and all these policy committees should retain oversight on those KPIs that are important to their particular area so they can inform decision making. But perhaps what we do, either the chair or the vice chair or in cooperation with other members, we actually review carefully which KPIs are really, really important.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. For transparency, I've been here on Monday when we voted PED, we voted for this, and Environment on Tuesday when we voted against it. To put into context how I feel about this, in PED, lots of the work is very project-based. So it kind of makes sense to have this approach. In environment, we were thinking very much that the work we do in Environment Committee affects residents in a very on-the-ground way. And when we're on the doorstep, it's really useful to have that information about storytelling, so that we could say things like, oh, we know there's been a lot of rain, so they're behind on the mowing, so that's why the weeding hasn't happened. And with many residents, if you explain things to them and they realise the reasons why, they're very amiable with that. But our concern yesterday was that we wouldn't have that access to that information in the same way. I feel about this committee is that we deal with the most vulnerable residents in the city, often in communities. When I think about people in temporary accommodation, about refugees, about these sorts of things. And I really appreciate the level of transparency and detail in the previous format of the committee scorecard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Soraya? Yep.
Thank you. I'm just, maybe I've misinterpreted this, but I think there's a need, a desire, probably quite rightly, to get some oversight KPIs. Is that right? So why does that prevent you having the other KPIs elsewhere like we have?
Through you, Chair, well, it doesn't. The potential problem is duplication. So it doesn't affect this committee as it happens at the moment, because the current off-log indicators don't pick up any of the indicators which are on the scorecard for this committee, but they probably will do in time. There's no doubt that we're producing housing indicators before too long. But two of the primary areas they've considered are planning processes, which is a key indicator on the PED committee, and recycling rates, which is a key indicator on the Environment Committee. And you really wouldn't want those committees not to be focusing on those things, because they're obviously really important to them. But the issue we potentially have is that we're then duplicating the information that we're providing to different committees and having the same discussion at two different committees and potentially coming up with conflicting policy decisions within the two committees. So then where do we go from there? So what I'm interested in doing is trying to find a way to avoid that kind of conflict situation that can arise. Having worked in committees, I've worked in the cabinet models and I've worked in the committee systems, and where the problems primarily arrive within the committee structure is when you get those kind of conflicts, because you can end up with a position where nobody is quite sure what decision has been taken, or you can end up in a position where one committee is handing it over to the next committee and then handing it back to that committee for consideration. So trying to work, create a system where that doesn't happen is what's in my mind. The best way to do that will depend upon, how this council wants to take forward this whole agenda. But that's really the issue. We can, of course, have them on both committees, and of course, the individual committees will have a real interest in those particular things. But if the current system doesn't lend itself terribly well to a corporate overview. So how do we get to that position where we've got that kind of corporate overview at the same time as the range of indicators that we have?
So I was just wondering, is it not an idea to create new ones then to give that corporate overview anyway? Because by definition, it's a different view.
By all means, except these are being handed down to us by Oflog. So the indicators are the ones that they want us to report on, that we need to make sure that we're responding to. They already exist within our committee scorecards. But if you are a member of PED, you're well aware of the planning issues, but you're not necessarily aware of the environmental issues. So how do we create something where all members are aware of all of the key issues, so we all know that we're in the right place as far as Oflog is concerned?
Yep, Councillor Petrowski.
So on Monday, as recently as on Monday, I voted in favour of this, and I think my main motivation was trying to sympathise and put myself in the shoes of officers who would like to have a handle on the overall performance. I think just again trying to be helpful to the officers here now is that a lot of what's being discussed at the PNR committee could be shared and discussed within the political groups. So it would be down to political groups to share this information. I think what the committees could then focus on is their particular remit. So as I understand it, the proposed 24-25 committee performance scorecard, more or less corresponds to what we had already in place. The only thing missing here is the performance indicators, which I think that they will be added. So in that respect, if I understand it correctly, I think it would be easier for us to feel that we are measuring ourselves against the peers, against what's required in the centre. My only criticism of the proposed Oflog metrics is well, it's a little bit arbitrary. I think it's quite sort of finance corporate heavy. What we could do with is perhaps add an additional column to reference it to our strategic plan, perhaps just to see how it sits within the city strategy, city council strategy. Other than that, I think it would be helpful, and it would help officers to feel less as if they're working for, I don't know how many committees, a number of cabinets effectively, they feel like they have to respond to.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, we're happy to respond to as many cabinets as are available. That's what we're here for. And we're supportive of the approach that we currently have. It's just, I take your point about what do Oflog handing down to us, how does that fit into our priorities and local democracy and what's important to us. So finding a way through that. And I think that's something we'll pick up more in our discussion about the audit committee next week, where we're looking at how this this performance management stuff fits in with our overall internal environment and makes sure that we are a kind of a sound organisation, and that comes back down to that sort of golden thread. What is it we're trying to achieve as an organisation? And if our systems don't help us to do that, then they're not working. I'm not a fan of Oflog or what's being presented here. I'm trying to respond to it and get in a position where it doesn't do too much damage, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, Councillor Lamb.
I was, to be fair, I mean, Tom makes a very good point here. But, you know, let's be honest with you. Oflog is something that's been brought up by this government. In a year's time, they're going to be gone. To be honest with you, let's be honest here, it's going to be gone. So we're going through all this about the sort of death throes of the existing administration. And to be honest with you, you know, I know what's been said, that the KPIs we have reflect the priorities of this council. And I appreciate that sometimes the KPIs don't always lend themselves well to benchmarking, and we can only see whether things are going up or down over a period of time, and we're not always sure, well, how does this compare to other councils? But you know, the sort of criteria set out by Oflog are clearly priorities chosen by central government. What's important to, with all due respect, a Conservative government? What's important to them? Well, what might be the priorities of this council, which is run perhaps by a slightly more sort of left of centre set of councillors? It will be different. So I think we should stick with it. I know we've got to do it, you know, for the time being, until they're gone and something else comes in. But for the time being, we have to follow this. I appreciate that. But I still think the KPIs we have decided as a council are important to Worcester. I still think we should have access to them.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other contributions? Yeah. Councillor Collier.
Yeah, I am wary of some of these things. It feels reminiscent of my day job in education, where you're given things that you need to prioritise that may not be in the best interest of the community. So I think for me, what I'm trying to work out is the point of the scorecard or the KPIs is so we can have the most effective and transparent and robust way to measure performance and progression on things which we consider the priorities and actions that need to happen for the people of Worcester. So this is where I feel a bit conflicted about what we're being asked to do from an Oflog perspective. My question really is about the recommendation is to consider. So what's the timeline? Where would this go? Should we agree to consider where does this go next? Sorry if that's already been covered.
Through you, Chair, we not really sure, to be honest. We developed a similar system. I was involved in the creation of this system in the first place, and we developed a similar system of trying to engage all the committees in the finance process, and that's very much a corporate process, and we try to do it, and I go to all of the committees and try to make sure everybody has an input into that. So I'm just trying to follow that kind of model, just talk to committees about this and say, well, what do you think? And then a similar one's going to policy and resources next week. And then when we reconvene in June, as it were, we will then have had a few weeks to sort of to develop, take into account all this feedback and develop a system and then present something to the June committees. I can see what we you know, my sense of the discussion is that we won't end up with something too much far from where we are at the moment, but hopefully more focused, with a greater relationship between the priorities of the committee and the performance measures that we've got, which are helping us to see whether we're making that progress, but something which is, you know, perhaps quite limited in terms of responding to Oflog. Because the dimension, as Matt's mentioned, that Oflog brings is the benchmarking element, because they're comparing us with other councils rather than just comparing ourselves over time and understanding what our issues are. The other feature of their work, of course, is it's 2 years out of date. So they might well be asking us about information which happened 2 years ago, and so we moved on from that. So, you know, perhaps I'll take your advice and present a limited response on the grounds that it's not necessarily got legs, maybe. But it's in the June committee, Kate. We'll come back and talk about it there and try to agree an approach there.
Shane, any other questions or comments? Yeah, Councillor Collier took the question at the bottom of my list. I was going to ask what happens next, but just had the answer
I don't know.
Well, you don't know what happens next in terms of shaping this.
Yeah.
It's going to come forward in June. So all comments being made tonight are going to, contribute to what happens in June. I'm not going to say too much other than to agree with the points about having local targets as opposed to targets or performance measures as dictated by the Office for Local Government, which, as Councillor Lamb, I believe, correctly said, the government might not be there very long, and we'll be having a new system imposed upon us, potentially. I think 4.1 in the report, one sentence, is a very strong argument to keep what we already have. The KPIs currently collected for the Policy Committee scorecards are largely locally defined. Put a full stop there. You've got an alternative proposal. I personally, I came into this genuinely open-minded. This came up at communities briefing, and I said to Shane and other officers, I'm undecided. And it says it all. Councillor Cooper said one committee in favour, one committee against. So there are clearly arguments for and against, and I genuinely was all ears just now. But like I said, 4.1, it emphasises the local aspect. Why should we have performance measures top down? We are Worcester, not an extension of Whitehall. And 4.2, the reporting of over 200 key performance indicators across 6 committees does not provide a clear corporate view. I'd suggest that that's a piece of homework to make those 200 KPIs fit within the corporate view. I don't see why that's something that needs to put a block on things. There are 200 key performance indicators, all of which are local. If we need to herd them within strands of the corporate strategy, that's a piece of work that we can do, I think. So I will look forward to, hearing what's agreed in June, because we're not actually voting on a whole new performance matrix here. The report, the recommendations are to note a potential revised approach and to note the scorecard. Again, how can you not note things? So, again, I hope that's helpful. Julian, do we need to say we note?
Chair, obviously I've made some notes of your discussion this evening, which will be reflected in the minutes, and then I'll help officers to formulate the report back to the committee in June.
Yeah. Is that okay with everyone?
Can I just make
Oh, yeah, Shane, yeah, go on.
one final observation, because this comes up quite often. How can you not note, or how can you not consider? The reason the recommendations are there is that it allows you to put forward an amendment or an addition. So we've considered this and we have decided that. You don't have to say that you've decided that, but that's why we say that. So you can consider it and not agree with it, as the Environment Committee did the other night, or you can consider it and wholeheartedly endorse it, or you can just consider it. So that's why the recommendations are formed.
Noted. Thank you. I don't think anyone's on the cusp of advocating a whole new proposal, so I think we'll just note what Shane's presented and move on, if that's okay. Thank you very much, Shane.
That was very helpful.
Thank you. We've got still packed agendas, so may I suggest that we take the next item and then have a break, or people wanting to break now? Yeah, we'll do the Ukraine report and then we'll have a break. Yeah? Okay. Just get myself sorted, bear with. So, agenda item 6, update on the Homes for Ukraine support scheme and local authority housing fund. And it's Tom. Excuse me, Tom. I was trying to get to the last page, but we already had that discussion, so over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an information report to be noted by the committee. It provides an update on the local authority housing scheme, which we committed to bring back to this committee for regular updates, and to also provide an update on the local authority housing fund. I won't go into the background, that's within the report, and hopefully provides the context which members may be familiar with. So just skip down to section 3 of the report, just to provide an update on current numbers and and sort of impacts locally within Worcester. So since the scheme launched on the 14th of March 2022, we've had 266 guests arrived in Worcester, and 148 still reside in the city. So a number of guests that did arrive have subsequently left the city. There's currently 67 guests from 47 different groups being hosted within sponsor households in Worcester, and they're dispersed across the city, which I've added into the report at 3.7, just to give a bit of a representation of where those households are. In addition to those being hosted, 42 guests are currently in independent private rented accommodation, and 39 are in social rented accommodation. There are a number of guests registered still to arrive in Worcester. However, we've got 90 registered to arrive. However, throughout the scheme, there's been individuals registered that then don't transpire to come. 55 of those 90 have visas issued. So throughout the scheme, we've always been uncertain as to the sort of attrition rate of numbers of guests that are registered and actually arrive. The number of arrivals have remained relatively stable, so numbers have reduced quite significantly for quite a period of time now. Most recently, what we've seen is that Ukrainians that arrived through the scheme have moved on into independent accommodation and then become sponsors themselves. Following a change to the guidance on the 19th of February, that's no longer possible. So it's now only UK nationals that are able to become sponsors. So what we anticipate is the number of new arrivals likely to continue to reduce. So by way of activity, the team have arranged and facilitated a range of events. In section 4.7 of the report, there's some further detail around the nature of some of those events and activities that have been arranged. But a lot of the activity is focused around delivering support to individuals, a whole range of different things, very much bespoke to the individual and what their needs are. Many Ukrainians that have come to the city haven't needed any support whatsoever. Some have required quite significant levels of support. Some examples have been around accessing healthcare, education, employment, training, and moving into independent accommodation once their hosting arrangements have come to an end. That has been a particular priority, and as I'm sure members of this committee will be aware, does present pressure, particularly around the demand for housing generally in the city being very high. But we've been very successful in minimising the risk of homelessness. We haven't had many people that we've had to place into any sort of temporary accommodation. So we've been able to support people in a planned way to move on to their own independent accommodation. And a lot of that we're very grateful for sponsors in being amenable and flexible with extending periods of stay. So the original Ukraine scheme was offered for a maximum stay of 3 years, the visa. This has been changed on the 19th of February to 18 months, and new arrivals visas are only granted for 18 months now, as opposed to the original 3 years. There has been an announcement of a Ukraine Permission Extension Scheme, and that provides an opportunity for Ukrainians who have arrived through one of the schemes to apply for a further 18-month extension. We're still waiting for announcements of exactly what that will look like, and there's not currently any detail around whether there'll be a pathway to permanent residency beyond the expiry of any visas. In Worcester, we're anticipating the first arrivals that came through the scheme arrived in March, so their visas, March 2022, so their visas will initially be coming to an end in 2025, so we'll be providing support around applying for extensions to those should they wish. So moving on to a brief update on the Local Authority Housing Fund. So within section 6 of the report, there provides a bit of detail around what it involves, what the nature of the scheme was, but essentially it was some government grant funding provided to facilitate the acquisition of accommodation for Afghan and Ukrainian households living in the UK through one of the four specific resettlement schemes. The council were allocated just over £1.1 million through the scheme in order to deliver 11 properties. So at the last update of the Local Authority Housing Fund back in March 23, at that stage we just identified a delivery partner being Platform and developed a model of delivery. The model of delivery wasn't the ideal model of delivery, but we recognised that it's surrounded new build acquisitions, purchasing new builds on the open market, and rent levels being set at affordable rent levels. So it wasn't the ideal scenario, but it gave us an opportunity for some delivery, and we went into it on that basis. So delivery has been very challenging. There's a whole range of reasons why that's been the case. Price of market sale new build properties is high in Worcester. The grant rate that Worcester City received proved challenging around viability, and then the affordability of the units of accommodation identified based on the rent levels that were set also proved the challenge. So due largely from the impacts and risks that have been generated from delivering some of these units in a neighbouring authority, particularly around the ability for them to identify suitable nominations to the property, Platform unfortunately reached a commercial decision in February to withdraw from delivery of the scheme in Worcester. So unfortunately, we aren't able to deliver any of the Local Authority Housing Fund funded scheme through Platform in Worcester. Since then, we have been continuing to work with Platform. Been working with neighbouring authorities as well as looking at alternative provisions for delivery ourselves. Timescales are very tight, so delivery needs to be by the end of March. There's an opportunity for that to drift slightly into the next financial year, but and we've been in discussions with the Department of Levelling Up around what that might look like. We have secured nomination rights for 6 properties in a neighbouring authority, so we have been able to facilitate access to some Ukrainians that have arrived in Worcester into properties. We still gain the benefit of meeting some of their housing need, and we're currently looking at an option to utilise a proportion of the grant funding through an acquisition of a property within Worcester. I'll leave it in there. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Tom. So, any comments, questions? I'll make a note of the running order. To Tom first. Anyone else? Oh, yeah, go ahead, Councillor Petrovsky.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Tom. This is, I was reading this report with vivid images of a documentary which I watched 2 days ago, I think, 20 Days in Mariupol, which told the story of the invasion of that city by the Black Sea and the sheer horror that people escaping war were experiencing. It's something that shook me to the core. So the reason I mention this is it makes me proud to see how we welcomed Ukrainian refugees. I have two questions and a suggestions, I suppose. Will we get into trouble as a local authority if we start calling these people war refugees? Why do we keep on using this impersonal language of tourism? They are not here as our guests, they are here because we provided shelter for them, they are war refugees. So I'd like to sort of understand what the scope for that is. And the one thing which is of concern, and therefore my suggestion is, in 5.9, I think you've alluded to this, Tom, as well, the extension for the visas has been granted for 18 months, but then what? I think we should be on the forefront, perhaps talking to other local authorities who are hosting these people fleeing war and brutal aggression, to plead with the government of whatever colour to grant them settled status. From what I've seen, they come here, they make a success of their life, and despite the heavy trauma, they are a massive asset to our community. I'd also like to mention that May the 11th, this council plans to host an event celebrating Europeans living in our city, and it will be really, really good to see some of our Ukrainian friends attending on the day. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lawrence? Sorry,
thank you,
did some, excuse me, Tom's going to come, can you come back on that? Yeah. Yeah, it's, apologies, sir. Sorry, Tom.
It's government language, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, the language, I mean, is taken from the government guidance, essentially. So it reflects that. It's the terminology used around sponsors, hosts, and guests, hence the use of it within the report.
Sorry, just for clarity. So if an officer starts talking about war refugees, you're likely to get into trouble. I can say what I think, whereas I think you are constricted by the requirements that are put on the local officers. Is that?
Chair, I think the important thing to note is that what we're using is consistent language as part of the Homes for Ukraine scheme, so that seems appropriate to me to use that. I'm sure every councillor on the table would have perhaps a terminology they would use, but I think the important thing is that we remain consistent with the government policy.
Thank you, Lloyd. I think that means use whatever platform you have as a councillor to use different terminology if you want to. I'm going to come back to you, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Lawrence?
Thank you, Chair. I know this is about homes specifically, but I have a concern. We address it as homes, but these people have come, they're living with us, we've got their children are in our schools. Rather than a hard and fast at 18 months, that's it, and I'd like to see that we would be generous enough to allow children to complete their education and remain in their homes, and with the scheme have flexibility to extend.
Tom?
Yeah, I mean, it's not within the City Council's gift, essentially, so it is the national policy. At the moment, I mean, guidance has changed frequently throughout the period of the scheme. So most recently, the latest update was on the 19th of February, which announced the 18-month extension. Guidance specifically references that there has yet to be any formal announcement around routes to permanent residency or any extension beyond that. So we're operating within the guidance that's made available to us.
That's the answer I expected. I just think we should also remember this is humans and children in particular that have come here and settled, and it's not just numbers.
Thank you both. Any other comments, questions? Sorry, excuse me, Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. Tom, thank you for this report, and I'd like to thank you for your work that your team have done to really welcome the Ukrainians. A highlight for me was the Worcester show and the Ukrainian exhibition there. I count some Ukrainians as my friends that I've met, and they have enriched our city, and I am really grateful for the support, so thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. So this is another report for noting, but I've got some of my own thoughts, if that's okay, if you indulge me. So, yeah, I mean, before the meeting began, I'm discussing this item with the officers. Alarmed and annoyed that as of the 19th of February, Ukrainians within Worcester can't be sponsors, yet British people can. I can moan about it in this committee, but as we've just heard, this is central government. But, you know, on record, I think that's a disgrace. You know, why? Because the point's been made that Ukrainian people are part of the community in Worcester. Very pleased to see 5.6 that this scheme will help Worcester City Council's ambition of becoming a council of sanctuary, which was agreed on the 31st of January, so that's amazing. Thank you for that. 2 more points. So one point about reducing the visas to 18 months and then presumably sending people away. The local authority housing fund, which is £500 million over 2 years, is meant to create a legacy for domestic households by providing a new and permanent supply of accommodation. Well, if we've got permanent supply of accommodation, why are we curtailing people's visas? You know, they can stay a bit longer, can't they, if these houses are permanent? Just seems to be a bit of a contradiction there. And save the most controversial point until last, the point that I would have made if I was sitting over there instead of sitting in Councillor Riaz's chair. 6.2 says that this scheme will help to fulfil the UK's humanitarian duties to assist those fleeing war. So I look forward to seeing the Palestinian home scheme. Look forward to that one. Or perhaps it won't be within this government's time. Does seem to be a very strange and insulting level of hypocrisy there. So thank you again for indulging me. We are noting the report and noting the position in respect of the delivery of the Local Authority Housing Fund, which, as I said, is meant to create a legacy for Worcester. Everyone noting that? Thank you, everyone. Thank you, officers. Thank you, Tom. It's just over 8:20. Should we come back at 8:30? Or a bit longer? 8:30? And we'll resume. Thank you. During the meeting, we've got 3 more items on the agenda, and the first of those 3 is a private sector housing annual update 2023, and Ismene Broad is going to lead on the report. Thank you, Ismene.
Thank you, Chair. This is an information report just going through the private sector housing team over the last 12 months, just bringing to the committee's attention the work that we've been doing. It sets out the approaches that we've taken to raise thermal comfort for tenants in the private rented sector with the minimum energy efficiency enforcement project. We've also worked to try and drive up property standards in rented accommodation, and the proactive work we've undertaken throughout licensing and providing more information on where our focus is going to be for the next 12 months. So if I start with the MEES project, which is the minimum energy efficiency enforcement project, this is where it's unlawful to let a property with an EPC rating below an E without a valid exemption. We started off data cleansing the original information provided by the National EPC Register, and this resulted in 40 compliance notices that were served on landlords who were found to be potentially in breach of the regulations. During the course of the project, 17 further penalty notices were served, and 7 reviews and final financial penalty notices were issued. In a few situations, officers are identifying properties which have expired EPCs, where landlords have not undertaken a new assessment prior to reletting. These have been referred on to our trading standards colleagues who look towards the enforcement agency for that particular part of EPCs. So as a result of the project, many tenants are now living in properties which have improved internal wall insulation, more energy efficient lighting, more energy efficiency heating. And such outcomes not only enables the tenants to keep their properties warmer and reduce their heating bills, but it also can reduce the prevalence of condensation mould growth and reducing the likelihood of excess cold within a property and cardiovascular illnesses and diseases. As of January 24, we have 4 cases left to investigate and 5 cases mid-investigation. We're aiming to have this project completed by spring 2024. We're also delivering the HUG2, so the Home Upgrade Grant Phase 2 scheme. This follows on from the previous schemes of LAD1, AB, LAD2, HUG1 and LAD3 from the previous years. This is a grant-funded project from central government, and we report regularly to Environment Committee, as well as providing an annual update report to that committee. The scheme is aimed at reducing fuel poverty and improving energy efficiency in off-gas properties. These are properties which don't use gas for central heating. In addition to being off-gas, to be eligible, you need to have an EPC rating of D to G and a household income of less than 31,000. Applications have been taken and processed by Acton Energy, who are working with, and there are currently 3 applicants in the scheme. But due to the criteria that's set by the government, there is risk that approaches for assistance are not as high as we first hoped. The proactive work that we're doing includes investigation of Section 257 HMOs. Under additional licensing scheme that we currently have in place, they are required to have a HMO licence. The team has been working proactively to identify these properties and work with the landlords to license or to provide evidence that the property is not a Section 257 HMO. As part of this, the Worcester City Council HMO Standards, Conditions and Management document has been updated to reflect the slightly different standards for Section 257 HMOs, and this has been included in Appendix 1, which is also for noting. The team also responds to complaints made by tenants, as well as undertaking proactive HMO investigations. During the calendar year of 2023, we received 151 service requests, with 58 of them escalating to property standards complaints. In comparison to last year, which is in 2022, there has been an increase in the number of service requests received by the team, increase in the number of complaints received, and an increase in the number of formal health and safety rating system inspections undertaken. The total number of HMO inspections has also increased from 2022. During 2023, 29 statutory enforcement notices were served, and a breakdown of those are included in the report. The works that were undertaken included things like new heating systems, replaced windows, improved fire safety measures, and electrical safety reports being presented to their tenants. In addition to the reactive work that we undertake, there's also a well-attended landlord forum which was held in May 2023. We produced tenants' rights information, which was advertised in the City Life magazine, 2 rounds of press releases and social media promotion, highlighting the risks around damp and mould, as well as the publication of a landlord and tenant newsletter in spring 2023. We also have a tenants' rights and responsibilities leaflet available on the council's website and the Trinity Street Housing Advice Centre. And we've undertaken a members' briefing on private sector housing, which can be used to assist with residents' questions. Moving on to empty properties, work to bring empty homes back into use can be challenging and resource intensive. Empty homes work is undertaken across a small number of services and is coordinated through a problem property working group. Many different departments are involved, which includes planning enforcement, council tax, Worcestershire regulatory services, as well as the private sector housing team. In the private sector housing team ourselves, we write to owners of empty properties who have had their properties empty for over a year and again at over 2 years. Of those who are contacted, 10% respond to the team to update us with the situation, and we can see if there's any advice and assistance that we can provide. And 19% of those who we've sent the letter to come back into use. In addition to this, officers also visit empty properties and to assess and prioritise those, as well as to see whether there's any referrals that can be made to other agencies. The council does have formal enforcement action on empty homes. However, empty homes work is not statutory. Powers include empty dwelling management orders, enforced sales and compulsory purchases. However, it's to be noted that these actions are only fit specific properties and are resource intensive and slow to resolve. Looking forward to 24 and 25 priorities. Currently, the private sector housing stock condition survey is being undertaken and the final report is due in the summer. Once the results and recommendations have been presented, these will also be presented to this committee at the earliest opportunity. Following this survey, it will help identify future needs and will also inform the private sector housing strategy, which will also be presented to Communities Committee later this year. In addition, the next 12 months will involve the evaluation of the current HMO additional licence scheme, the subsequent consultation on whether to implement a future scheme once these end in August and September 2025. A further report will be brought to Communities Committee for the presentation on this subject. The Promoting Independent Living contract, which is delivering disabled facilities grants and a range of other services to support households to live independently, is currently under review with a proposal to re-tender the contract and will also be presented to Communities Committee later this year. In addition to these, the private sector housing team will continue to undertake proactive work to improve the standards of people in the private sector housing sector and will respond to reports of property standards complaints. Promotion of the service and how to contact the team and advice around proactive steps the tenants can make will continue to be promoted throughout the year. The recommendation for the report is to note it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Maney. It's a very detailed report, and also invite questions or comments from councillors regarding the report and also the updated HMO standards, so House of Multiple Occupancy Standards, Conditions and Management document, which is in Appendix 1. So I imagine most of the questions and comments will be about the report, but you've also got the opportunity to talk about the Appendix 1. So I'll just make a note of who wants to speak. Councillor Freya, Councillor Lawrence, Petrovsky, Cooper. Okay, I'll take those four. So Councillor Desiree.
Thank you, Chair. So this report doesn't cover the social housing landlords, is that correct? Yeah.
It covers private sector housing and the complaints we do have include social landlords in there, but it's not broken down per tenure.
So just to clarify, Councillor Zera, where we receive complaints about social rented properties, is mainly in the team, you know, we're legally obliged to investigate those, but what it doesn't cover is the general standard within the social rented sector. What will be in there are some small numbers around complaints received around social housing stock.
Okay, that's in there somewhere then. I must have missed it. Okay.
The number of complaints includes the social housing complaints from their tenants, if there are any.
Are you able to enforce their actions to, you know, deliver remedies?
So the legislation, the Housing Act, does cover social housing. So if there is a property disrepair where the landlord's not undertaking it, and a Category 1 or Category 2 hazards identified, we have the power or duty to undertake enforcement work on social landlords.
Okay, thank you both. Councillor Lawrence?
Through you, Chair. I'm very pleased to see this comprehensive set of criteria, and I'm very pleased to hear it applies to social housing, because you'll be hearing from me, I'm afraid. Yeah, so I'm very pleased that this might actually be a step towards improving stock in the future within the city, because I'm quite appalled at the state of some of the housing, as I'm sure you are well aware, and you've probably seen far worse than me. So I'm very pleased to see some action being taken. Thank you.
Chair, just to clarify, the point around social housing has been made twice. Obviously, the responsibility for ensuring proper standards are maintained are with the registered social landlords. So in the first instance, they should be contacted and given an opportunity to A, investigate, and B, remedy. The City Council shouldn't be the first port of call for any issues regarding registered providers.
Yeah, I'm just going to abuse my position to come in before the third speaker. Is that well known? Is it something that the City Council communicates to the public, that if you've got something wrong with your house, then you don't go to the council firstly, you go to the provider first, and if you're not satisfied, then you go to council? Is that widely known? Because
I would think it is, certainly with the added emphasis from government and the social housing regulator. I'm absolutely sure and convinced RPs will be telling their tenants what they need to do if they have any issues. And as I say, the City Council should be the last port of call.
okay. Thank you. Okay, you're going to come back on that, Councillor Lawrence?
Yes, thank you, Chair. What would you consider a reasonable timescale for a social provider to have been given an opportunity or number of attempts it has made to remedy the situation before it is fair to bring it to the city? Or should I just make the city aware?
Given that's a detailed question, Chair, perhaps it's one to take offline with Councillor Lawrence if there's a particular issue with a particular property and a particular registered provider.
Fair question, though. Thank you both. Councillor Petrovsky.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Ismini, for a very detailed report. I have a question around, it's an enforcement question, but nothing to do, you know, something which is within our remit, primarily within our remit. My question has to do with 7.5 in your report. So you mentioned that we have a possibility of issuing enforcement action on the empty homes. Taken in context that as of the end of January this year, we had 774 properties, with the breakdown further in the table, which, you know, gives us a number of those properties which I think affect neighbourhoods as well as it certainly, you know, in my case, derelict properties stand out and they cause countless of emails, telephone numbers and casework. It's not about being work shy, it's about the powers that we as a council have. So I'd like to sort of ask colleagues and members around the table whether we would have an appetite, and I'm happy to formally propose it if there is a seconder, an amendment to the recommendation asking for officers to come up with a formal enforcement action plan on empty homes within a reasonable time limit. And the reason for that would be, and I completely appreciate the fact that it's complex, every property has to be dealt individually. But I think this is definitely within our remit. And even if it's not the case of taking over the property under empty dwelling management orders or whatever, I think it sends the right signal to the property owners that we are serious about empty homes and we do not like them for all kinds of good reasons. And second of all, I think it could be proven effective in us trying to be innovative and bold in trying to tackle the housing crisis. And perhaps this could be an unexpected plank in the other work. So as I said, I'll be very happy if I find a seconder to propose this amendment to the report. But first, I think it would be good to get the view from the author of the report or director or any officer.
Yeah, so with regards to empty homes, it is being included in the private sector housing strategy, and as part of that strategy there will be action points undertaken from it, and that strategy is due to come to Communities Committee after we've received the stock condition survey outcomes, so it will be this year.
I mean, I'm slightly reassured. What I'm looking for here is a sense of urgency of us taking a sort of concentrated focus on those empty properties. So when is it coming to the committee?
So I think we're looking to bring the recommendations and the outcome of the stock condition survey back to committee in autumn. Yeah. Okay, so July. So I would suspect then, Councillor Petrosky, that we can bring the revised strategy back in autumn to this committee. Absolutely acknowledge your point. Empty homes, particularly long-standing ones, are a real topic of conversation for local communities, and I absolutely get that. I think what we will be hamstrung by is the amount of resource that we've got available in the council to deal with empty homes. Hopefully what will reassure you is, and you will be aware of this, I think, from your own ward, what we do have, I think Ismaine's pointed to it in the report, we have a problem property group. So that's a multi-service group of officers who are constantly monitoring and working through a priority list of empty properties for action. But I think the other thing just to note in the report is a lot of the tools in the tool bag for dealing with empty properties, they are not quick solutions. They are long-term solutions that take time and involve engagement. So as much as I get your wish for urgency, I just simply don't think this is an area of council work that can be moved on quickly, particularly with the resource that we've got available.
I mean, I appreciate the scale of the difficulty, and I completely get the issue with the resources. I'm just really troubled by the fact that we are happy to acknowledge that this is an issue. It's difficult. However, we are not listing it as one of the priorities, and it's not listed as one of the priorities here. I think it should be. So perhaps a reference or some kind of assurance from your team that whatever the vehicle you choose and they think is appropriate, whether it's the revised strategy in July, I personally would like to have reassurances that we are putting this front and centre. And as I said, it's not necessarily the case of us being ambitious and trying to take over those properties. I think it's more about, yes, trying to do that when it comes to certain properties, but also sending a clear message to landlords who are sitting on assets very often, doing nothing, because they can afford to do so. So I'm still tempted to propose it as a formal amendment to the report, unless I get some kind of reassurance from the officers. I'm not sure what colleagues think, that this will be somehow coming back, if I'm to sit on this committee in July, God knows, that is coming back as a priority as part of that update in a separate document in July time.
So I think what we can commit to doing is putting a draft private sector housing strategy in front of you, either in July or in October. That will give you a chance as members to debate where you want Ismeni and the team's resources to be prioritised. I think we are very conscious that empty homes is important to members. Again, what I would remind members is though, and these are the types of conversations that we're going to need to have moving forward in terms of setting our budget. Empty homes isn't the statutory responsibility of this council. Responding to complaints is, and category 1 and category 2 hazards are, but empty homes isn't. That doesn't mean it's not going to be a priority, but again, it's just worth noting that. But when we bring that strategy back to members, that will be the chance to debate which priorities you will want to see, but empty homes will certainly feature.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I'll be actually interested to hear what other people think. I'm not sure about Chair's view on this.
I'll hold fire for now, but I think obviously you raise a very good point. Let's see how it pans out, and then maybe come the end you want to put forward a proposal. But yeah, keen to bring in Councillor Cooper and Councillor De Sera. Can't pronounce your surname, I so apologise. Yeah, I knew I got it wrong 10 minutes ago. So 1, 2, we'll take those, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to raise 2 very separate points, please. Well, first of all, I'd like to say this is one of the most detailed reports I've seen come to committee, so I really appreciate your hard work on this. And Tom, no doubt, will be very pleased, because often I email him about these things. So that's something you don't have to do, Tom. So I think it was not last year, the year before, Councillor Lewing and I went round about 70 homes in our Arboretum area, trying to work out who didn't have an EPC and who had an EPC of E below, and knock on those doors and speak to those residents. We spoke to 70, and I think 3 or 4 took it up. One is delighted with their solar panels and windows and doors, and it really transformational in his life. But I think one of the things is that people need help filling in forms. And I think that's why some of this uptake is so low. So I'm wondering if there's some workaround within that could be possible to be able to help with. It was the Lad 2 scheme we helped with, but I think there's some mileage in it. Often these people are elderly and they've lived in their house for a long time. That's why they haven't had an EPC. So I'd really like some consideration in form filling. This is 4.7. And then around property standards is a separate thing, which is section 6. So, for example, I've been in a block of flats where there's been mould all down the staircase, a big block of flats. And we've reported it to private sector housing, and they've said we can't act unless the resident tells us. Now, we know that given the situation in the private rented sector, that it's very difficult for residents to put their heads above a parapet and say, I'm concerned about mould in communal areas for fear of being given notice to eviction notice. So I'm wondering if there's some way that councillors can advocate for vulnerable residents. Thank you.
Thank you for those questions and the points on that. If I take them separately, so with regards to the help with filling out forms, I'll come back to you on that one and raise that as a potential improvement if it's required. I'll find out what's being done for residents in that situation. With regards to the communal flats and tenant complaints, we do need the tenant to make the complaint. However, if you are working on behalf of the tenant. If the tenant gives permission for you to speak on our behalf, then we could accept that. So it's having the tenant's permission to make a complaint to us, because the landlord will find out, has legally got to know that we're undertaking any visits that come out of any complaints that arise.
Thank you. So to clarify, is that a legal obligation or is that City Council policy, please? Thank you.
It is a legal obligation in the legislation that we must inform the landlord with minimum 24 hours notice that we're undertaking a housing health and safety rating system inspection.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, to clarify, is it a legal requirement that the resident needs to complain to the landlord? Or when I'm seeing mould and going in places and I have emailed private sector housing and they've said we can't help unless a resident themselves complains to their landlord. So that's the bit I'm seeking clarification on, please.
I think the first thing is to note that the landlord needs to have the opportunity to repair something. So if the tenant's not told the landlord, how would they undertake the repair of the issue that's there? And they might willingly come straight back out and do it. It's when the landlord's not undertaking that's when we can assist, but we do need the tenant to raise that with us and to confirm that they're happy for a complaint to be received.
Okay, thank you both. Councillor Sarah.
Thank you. So just touching a little bit on Tom's point about priorities and, you know, making empty houses one of those. I think for me the only real priority should be safety. So, you know, that's got to be top of everything, and my own use of your service has always been around anything I thought wasn't safe. The empty housing, yes, it should be looked at for sure, but that's just my input on that anyway.
Thank you. Any other thoughts, questions? Minded to come back to you, Councillor Petrowski, in a moment regarding your suggestion. Just a few more comments of my own yet again. Thank you again for the report. It is really, really super detailed. So first observation is at 6.3, 32 property inspections, which is an increase on 2022. Might have had something to do with COVID, I don't know. But 32 property inspections doesn't seem very many in the city the size of Worcester. Perhaps if I just ask a question, you know, why is that number quite low? Is it because people are frightened to complain? Is it because there is a big resourcing issue within the council? We can't do the inspections in the numbers that we want to do? Why is that number so low?
I think the first step that we always undertake is provide advice and assistance to our tenants who contact us, or anybody else who might contact us through phone or email or on our website. Once we've provided that information to the tenant, they might go and think of it, decide what they want to do. They might follow the advice, and they may not need us. So in this number of service requests we've got, were 58 complaints on property standards, and only 32 of them resulted in the inspection. So it might have been that some of those tenants undertook their own resolution or talked to their landlord themselves and resolved the situation without the council's involvement. With regards to the inspections, when we are working with tenants and that they want an inspection to undertake, we will go and do the inspection. So I hope that reassures you.
Yeah, thank you, it does. So it seems like it's a last resort, ultimately, to do an inspection. So another observation, it comes back to what Councillor Cooper said about us being advocates. And some of you have already heard me mention this example before, but a resident in my ward is at their wit's end because of damp and mould and the lack of response from a private landlord. You know, they needed a member of their family to do emails for them. They contacted myself, and the city council have been involved and done an inspection. I mean, it should never have got to that stage. The landlord should clearly have, tidied up the property. So what am I trying to say? I'd echo the point about us being advocates for people, because I do think people are frightened of complaining, and also don't have the skills to complain. I'm regularly surprised that people, they don't do emails, they don't want to make phone calls, and if we're sending out newsletters or knocking on doors, dare I suggest that we could offer that as a service to people who really are desperate, because that's what I've been involved in recently. I'm not saying I'm a perfect example, I'm just saying that's one person I've tried to help. Maximum penalty of £30,000. I appreciate that's a sort of a tactic to further down the line, but is that something that we could promote as a council to landlords as sort of as a carrot and stick approach? If you don't look after your houses, this is what could happen, because I reckon that some landlords could be compelled to tidy up their properties if they knew that they might get a £30,000 fine. So that's an actual question. Is that something that we would do, promote that fine?
I don't know whether I use the word promote, Chair.
Not promote. I'm tired, it's pub time. You know what I mean? Publicise. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So when we're involved in complaint work with landlords and we're notifying them that there's an issue raised at their property, we will notify them of what the potential outcome could be. So whether that's a civil penalty, whether that's prosecution, they are informed of that, so they do understand what the end process could be should they not make the improvements required at that property or undertake the licensing that's required of that property.
Thank you. Last one from me, and it relates to Councillor Petrovski's point about enforcement. In 8.5 it says the private sector team will continue to be proactive. So what, I mean, pardon me if you've already detailed it, but what is an example of our private sector team being proactive and stopping houses getting into such a state? How are we being proactive? And sort of sub-question is, how big is the team? Are we able to be as proactive as we want to be? Because 105,000 people in the city, it's a small council.
So if I can break those down, the first point about proactiveness, we will host our annual landlord forum again this year, which is encouraging landlords in good practice and providing any updates in any legislation that's coming through so they're aware of this. We also have the landlords newsletter, which we sent to landlords, and we've got the tenant one we did last year as well, which we can do again to try and provide some information on any sort of changes coming up for tenants. We've got on our website, if there's anything that's coming up, so things like when it's coming into autumn time, we'd look at promoting damp and mould and any sort of advice and things tenants can do and landlords can do. And certainly if there's anything that crops up during the year, we'll try and promote what we can when we can. With regards to the team size, we've got 4 property standards officers and a technical officer, and myself, who is part of the private sector housing team, as well as a project officer.
Okay, thank you very much. So before we bring this item to conclusion, just want to come back to Councillor Petrovski. Are you happy? Broad question.
Not quite, and I'll tell you why. I think 7.5 details the difficulties with enforcement and complexities. I accept that. When I got elected, I promised to be a strong and independent voice for my residents. And personally, I do not take sort of things as difficult or less difficult. There are casework. So I would like to ask colleagues for a seconder to the amendment, addition to the report, that would say that, what was the title of the document, Lloyd, which is coming up in July?
Private sector housing strategy.
So the amendment would read as follows. The committee mandates officers to include within the private sector housing strategy a formal enforcement action plan on empty homes. And I think this way, personally, I would feel reassured that we are taking a strong action. We are not forgetting about it. And difficult is not a deterrent. I get £317 for being a councillor. I do it because I love public service. And I do it because it is difficult sometimes. So if I can find a seconder for that, I would be very happy to put this motion, sorry, not the motion, amendment to include in the report.
Just one thing, Chair, just to confirm to members that the private sector housing strategy, as it's been produced before, has always included a section on empty homes. So you can take my word for it or not, but the next one will include a section on empty homes, just to reassure members.
May I say that your emphasis is on action plan rather than a strategy? Yeah.
I'm very sorry, Chair. Yes, indeed. I think an action plan, things that we can do. And as I said, it's not necessarily to take over 774 properties in Worcester and start managing them. I think it's to to send a clear signal that this council is serious about empty properties and has a strategy and action plan to tackle them.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to second that. I think it's very sensible. And then, in that case, can I ask if others support that being added to the recommendations? Is that just checking the protocol? Show of hands? Yeah. Yeah.
If Chair, if members want to vote on that amendment,
discuss it first. Yeah.
You can ask him to debate the.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, maybe we should debate things rather than just leap to a vote. Do we want to have a debate about Councillor Petrovski's amendment or suggestion before we move to a vote? I've got 3 speakers. Councillor Lawrence, first of all.
Thank you, Chair. Sort of a question for Lloyd. How could we make something mandated that's not statutory? Is that allowed?
Members set policy. So as a council, we do lots of things that are non-statutory, but they've been sort of ideas and plans that have come from members, developed by officers, and then put back to you for decision. So it's not only the non-statutory stuff that we deal with. So that is at members' discretion.
But surely then that would detract from what is statutory and what we must achieve.
Absolutely. The more non-statutory stuff that we do will potentially impact on service standards within the statutory led services, unless extra resources is put in. And I'm not going to ask Shane for a view on resources because you all know that particularly well.
Councillor Wilmore.
Thank you, Chair. This obviously isn't my normal committee, so forgive me if I'm not familiar with the context, but just on face value, there seems to be a concern here that by detracting scarce officer time to support what is a very worthy and kind of necessary plan, the fact that we've all raised concerns about the standard of properties. We've all been in residence properties that you wouldn't house a dog in. And I just feel like if there is a priority, it is around the safety, around the conditions that people are living in, rather than something that isn't statutory. And we've already had a reassurance from the officers that it will be tackled in the report as it comes to the committee later on in the year.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor De Saver.
I completely agree. I would be worried that safety will take a back seat necessarily if it gets bumped up the list in this way. I think it is important, absolutely, but not at the expense of safety when we have a limited resource in the team we have.
Hey, any other speakers on Councillor Petrovski's empty home strategy or action plan, excuse me?
I've never suggested that safety should take second, third or fourth place. What I have suggested is having something hard in the document which is coming to this committee that says we are doing something about it, rather than, as in we have a plan, rather than we acknowledge that it's difficult and complex. That is all that I said. I don't see those two as mutually exclusive.
And Chair, not willing to drag this one out, but there is work that's currently taking place on empty homes. So there's proactive work, there's enforcement work, and there's things like the council tax premium for long-standing empty homes. So the council does have a current strategy for empty homes. You know, we absolutely acknowledge how much of an issue it can be. I believe we're using all the powers that are available to us, but many of them, like I said to Councillor Petrosky earlier, they're complex, they take a long time to work through. And again, we can review what we're doing and bring that back as part of the strategy in autumn.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. I just wonder how we fare against other local authorities. I wonder if there have been any benchmarking work to see if we have more or less empty homes. Thank you.
Chair, I don't think that neither of us would have that at our fingertips at the moment. That is something that we do look at from time to time, but I wouldn't be able to answer Councillor Cooper's question.
That's fair enough, but yeah, it's a great question. I'd really like to know the answer. Okay, I think we're keen to make a decision on Councillor Petrovski's suggestion. Is it worth reading it out again, Julian? Just so we clear, we're voting on the same thing. Sorry to oblige.
Yes, Tom's proposed amendment was that the committee mandates officers to include within the amended private sector housing strategy a formal enforcement action plan on empty homes.
Thank you. So, all in favour of that suggestion, amendment? All those against? Any abstentions? So it's a tie.
Chair, shall I just clarify that? So for anybody who might be watching, that was 4 in favour, 4 against, and 1 abstention.
So, have a casting vote. Is this what power feels like? Well, seeing as I voted originally for it, I still maintain that it's the right thing to do. So I'd vote again for it. Now back to the original recommendations.
As amended.
Yeah, so we've done that one. So we've got the 2 original at the top of the paper, which again is to note the content of the report and to note Appendix 1, which relates to HMO standards and conditions. Everyone note those 2? Yep. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. So we have 2 more main items on the agenda, and the next one is the 6-month update report on Worcester's Housing Enabling Strategy 2023 to 2026. And it's going to be led by James Beale. So you had to check the name again.
Right, thank you. Right, thank you, Chair. So this is a six-month update report. Again, another to-note report, but comments welcome, obviously. There's a report and two appendices. The figures in the Appendix 2 in terms of completions are slightly different from the report. That's because it's still a little bit of a moving feast in terms of what we're actually going to deliver by year end, obviously the end of this month. But essentially, this is a 6-month update report on the housing enabling strategy, which was approved at this committee last year. It's the second report to the committee. And just as a bit of background, the strategy itself sets the framework, and it's a 3-year strategy. We also have a delivery plan, which has various actions, in other words, to deliver the strategy. These actions, some of them are time limited and some of them are ongoing, and some of them will change over time because of circumstances or different, changing situations. There are 8 strategic goals set out within the strategy that are mirrored in the action plan. Now, I will present against the 8 goals, which is the process that we did last time. And just for reference, the 8 goals are set out in the table at 2.3. Before we move on to progress against the actions of these goals, I think it's worth just spending a bit of time discussing the affordable housing market as is, because obviously our strategy was informed by the process at the time, what was happening at the time in the market. But as we all know, our traditional partners have reviewed and looked at their business plan and focused their strategies because the cost of construction has gone up, as we all know. Also, the impact on registered providers' business plans, they've been curtailed by their inflationary costs, not in terms of construction, but in terms of repairs, maintenance, operation. And there's a focus upon the contracted programme with Homes England. So many parts of the country are finding that registered providers aren't, for example, buying Section 106 sites, which are sites delivered through planning obligation. And they are certainly looking at larger sites rather than the small infill sites, which tend to present themselves within the city, being we're a city. So we've had to look more innovatively at our sort of partners and even look in terms of what we can do ourselves as a local authority in terms of upping the level of delivery we need. So that's just to set a bit of context. So we move on to the goals. The first goal is really about the targets, and it's our headline target. So it's quite an important goal, and it sets out the targets for delivery over 3 years and for delivery this financial year. Interestingly enough, we are, well, interesting is probably not the right word. we're going to be under our target set for this year. This is because of a reasonable amount of slippage. I think the good news is that we are moving in the right direction. Our delivery or forecast delivery this year, it's on a continual upward trajectory since 2018-19, and certainly next year we'll be looking to deliver over 200. I think another thing to highlight in the graphs I've set out is within Worcester, our target for Worcester City, we are anticipating exceeding our target in Worcester City over the 3 years. Not by much, but I think that's a positive for the city. We also look at targets on the urban extension sites outside of our boundary in south of Worcestershire, south of Worcester, where we have nomination rights under the housing accord with Malvern Hills and Wychavon. Now that side of it, we've had, we are anticipated at this moment in time not to hit our delivery targets from what we're expecting to come through. And we really know what's going to happen in 2 years' time. Sites, there's a throughput of sites in terms of the timescales. So that's generally because a lot of these big urban extension sites, a lot of sites have been delayed for numerous reasons. House builders are slowing down their delivery timelines because of the sort of market stalling a little bit. And obviously registered provider sites are dependent on the delivery of the sites. There's also been other issues, as you always have with these sites, with sort of highways, infrastructure and that type of thing. However, I think the important thing to note about the urban extension sites is that's where the opportunities are going to lie for bigger registered providers to buy significant amounts of units from house builders. It's not going to happen. It has happened in the city. Stonewater reported an open market site. So we've had additionality in the city, but we don't generally have the large urban extension Section 106 sites. And by Section 106 sites, I should explain that's sites where we have a percentage of affordable housing provided under planning obligation by planning policy. We tend to call them Section 106 sites, but that's not everyone's going to know what that means. So in terms of over delivery at this stage in time, to their overall target, which is 1,100 dwellings over the 3 years of the plan, we are about 200 shy in terms of what we know we're going to deliver at this moment in time. So our job is to look at closing that gap over the next 2 and a bit years. But we pretty much know what's going to come through. So it's a big goal, number one, obviously, because it's the headline targets. In terms of goal 2, well, that's really putting the team in place, and I've been appointed, so, and we have an officer, an enabling officer, who's been here for a while as well. And I think we'll move on later to our sort of next steps, but just to highlight, we'll continue to work with our traditional partners and funding bodies, but we're also starting to work with other providers and look at more innovative routes of providing accommodation. And I'll move on to that, I think, a bit more as we go through the report. Goal 3 is, there's not a great deal to report on Goal 3. It's about corporate strategies, and they tend to move at a certain pace. We do have the Worcestershire housing strategy adopted, and we had a meeting around the action plans and the 3 key streams of action, and we'll be involved in that in terms of pushing for the growth agenda on a county-wide basis. I think it's also worth saying that one of the targets for the housing enabling strategy was to look at the level of temporary accommodation. We have secured units of accommodation now, which we think is going to be sufficient to meet our needs. We'll always still have to need external providers for, high needs cases, etc., etc. And we always have those one-offs where we're going to have to phone up a hotel, etc. It just happens. But I think when those properties are on board, we will review the impact it has on our sort of homelessness budgets, etc., etc. And goal 4 is the build strong relationships with key partners. I think we do have good relationships with our partners. I think that, registered providers have their own issues at the moment in terms of their sort of capacity issues. There's a lot of pressures on them to look at their own stock because of pressures around, quite right, so around damp and mould, which has been mentioned earlier, and social housing landlord has been mentioned in that. I suppose there's quite a lot of pressure centrally for RPs to look at their stock, not just damp and mould, energy efficiency, cladding, fire safety is a big thing for them at the moment. So a lot of their resources have been dragged away from new build development towards their own stock. So, we still continue to work, and we look to work with other parties as well. Again, with the engagement with the public and private sector's investment, we talked about the LAF scheme with the government department, DULUC. We are looking to potentially look at that scheme again because it provides us a relatively generous level of grant and a level of flexible grant, so that is an access to funding for us. We've also started speaking to a few, I suppose, investment type registered providers and sort of private sector build to rent providers who will look at sort of apartment-led development. I'll move on a little bit about that, but there is a potentially percentage of affordable housing or key worker housing coming through that route, and I don't want to spoil my thunder on the goal I had it on, but I will now, so I won't mention it later. We've been having a meeting with the NHS trusts about their housing needs for their staff, and certainly build-to-rent providers we've been talking about are saying we do let around about 35% of our units to key workers, hospital workers, local authority workers, statutory ones. But so that's quite an interesting development, and it gives people security of tenure, because build-to-rent providers, they're there for the long haul. They're funded by pension funds, etc. So they're not going to sell up. So you know, that is an option for us to look at. In terms of raising awareness, well, we've got a communication strategy that's been developed. So we'll look at, you know, promoting affordable housing as, you know, this is a key priority for the council, and what can you do to assist us, etc., etc. I mean, goal 7 is an interesting one. The council's engagement in land promotion activities. I mean, there are sites kicking around that probably all know about. We do flag them up with the new type of providers coming in to see us. In fact, spoke to someone yesterday. They do know about some of these sites, but it's really up to these investors to look at these sites and perhaps talk to the landowners and explain the benefits of bringing the site forward, etc., etc. There's a couple of stalled sites in the city that we could do with, you know, pushing forward. So really, what we're looking to do, and I think the next committee will have something more concrete in terms of suggestions and options to actually increase delivery, rather than just, as we would have done 5 years ago, and we probably rather do now, rather than phoning up our local registered provider friends and saying, look, you know, this is a priority, what can you do in the city, etc., etc. Can you make it a priority? We do need to see what we can do ourselves with potentially other partners, and intentionally being quite creative in how we finance it all. So we should have something coming up in July to sort of set out options and how we can do that. So I think that's the main action for us, is just to actually get to the point of getting delivery on the ground, but also getting, if you like, the mechanisms for delivery, because housing development will take 2 years, well, with a good fair wind to come through. So we need to put those mechanisms in place to get things rolling, and potentially looking at feasibility side of stuff as well, which is obviously going to have a bit of a revenue drain, but that will be all wrapped up in our options. So again, that's really the report for note and comment. If you want to look at the actual outcomes against the individual targets, they're set out in Appendix 1, and again, a more detailed breakdown of just delivery this year, or expected delivery this year, estimated delivery in terms of breakdown of the tenure types, bedroom numbers, that type of thing. It's quite interesting. Well, maybe not for me.
Thank you, James. So any contributions? Councillor Teixeira, Wachowski? Councillor Cooper, excuse me, you first, were you? Sure, number 3. Yeah, 1, 2, 3. Okay, Councillor Teixeira.
Thank you. So in Appendix 1 at 1F, the point is made, work with County Council to develop an agreed approach to affordable housing provision on the Shrub Hill development site. Someone mentioned to me recently that sometimes there's an option to get out of the 20% profit margin that generally goes to developers. I don't know if that is something that can be considered rather than being a fixed thing, and then inevitably gives them the wiggle room to not deliver much affordable housing in the end. Is that an option for us?
Well, I mean, that's a valuation question, and unfortunately Kevin's left, but yes, generally speaking, valuation guidance will come down through the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors And when you have a viability appraisal, which is what you're talking about, it is generally accepted practice that a 20% profit is acceptable for a developer. And that's really driven by government guidance. If you speak to a valuer or you speak to a developer, they can work on less than that. And some of them do, and without pushing a viability. There's also other things that, and then I think the driver for that is because the government the current government wants to see delivery, and one of their views on restrictions on delivery is unreasonable demands on sites that are marginal. And I think the weight is now delivery, although we've had a bit of a roll back with, Michael Gove and his views on sort of planning numbers, etc. But previously, under sort of generic such, it was all about delivery. And I suppose listening to the sector, the demands on any large-scale development, they were arguing, well, this is stopping us developing out these, because the council wants 30% affordable housing, and then they want, this infrastructure works, they want community this, they want X, Y, and Z, and on a marginal site, that's stopping us bringing these sites forward. So I suppose they've set these, what they would call reasonable figures for developer profit, in order so that the developer can bring it forward. But you're right, you speak to a developer, they will sometimes work on a 15% profit margin, even less, sorry. There are other examples in terms of development interests. There's an assumption for development at the cost of development interest, whereas a lot of developers will cash flow it, so they're not actually accruing any interest. But it's still a figure that goes in the appraisal. But that's not really at the gift of the local authority. That's something that will come through Rick's guidance and Kevin's more is a registered value. He will be closer to that than I am.
Okay, thank you both. Councillor Petrowski.
Thanks very much. A point of clarification, I think, is us having the housing enabling strategy a statutory requirement, or yes or no? Is that? No, I don't. I'm not sure. I mean, obviously, we have a planning policy requirement in terms of having enabling strategy. It's not a statutory requirement, but it does feed on from our statutory requirements around homelessness. We need to create accommodation to house people that are coming through, but it's not a statutory requirement to have a housing enabling strategy. No. Thank you very much. I was expecting to hear that answer, and I'm glad that that was confirmed. James, I was relieved when I heard you indicating that there will be a plan to close the gap between the target, which is quite ambitious, given the characteristics of the city, and what has been delivered today, which is 105 by the end of this financial year. So just as a point of clarity for me, is this plan, because it will take quite a bit of wizardry, I think, trying to navigate well, the reality of the planning system, but also the priorities of the registered providers and so on and so forth. Is that plan coming here in July? Is that what we are realistically to be expecting?
Just to give a completely random example, we can acquire 4 properties on the open market, maybe ex-local authority properties that fit in with the management on an estate, and we can maybe draw down grant from X, Y, and Z, or maybe we can use our own money to make this work financially and have someone manage it. That's an example of the type of thing. So it's more concrete in terms of, rather than have a plan that says we will seek to look, because that's what the strategy does, we will look to work with people, we look to do this, it will be real examples of what we can do and how that's financed and how it sort of works out and the risks and the pros and cons for the council. So I wouldn't call it a plan, I would call it a delivery model. And maybe I'm a bit pedantic, but I think a plan is more about we plan to do this, whereas I'm thinking we have our plan, we need to actually, this is actually what we're going to do. These are the options that if members say, yes, we want you to do this, we'll go out and do it. And with all the implications and the pros and cons and the financial implications potentially that has for the council. Is that?
I think that's fair enough. So just a quick follow-up questions, Chair, if I may. The Greens in the room, when there was very few of us around here, were being laughed at when we talked about empty shops above the, empty flats above the shops and so on and so forth. So in terms of just going back to the discussion of we had about the previous paper, do you consider all options in terms of perhaps including the enforcement element of that the council has? The council has statutory powers to enforce action on derelict properties. Do we know how many of those 774 properties within the city, some of them would be flats above the shops or whatever we used to call them, are owned by hedge funds, people who are very happy to sit on their hands and let the property rot because it doesn't really affect them very much. So is this something that you are potentially taking into consideration? Simply because, as I said, because of the characteristics of the city, and even if you take Worcester as an area where you have this extended urban area where with its bits of Wychavon and Malvern sort of creep into the city proper. I think we will struggle if we don't look for some innovative thinking there, and that's purely based on what the goal is and how short we are. At the moment, we are, 200 properties short this year?
Yeah, well, I mean, that will be overall we are actually. This year we are short, but we'll make that bit up actually next year for the city. Sorry, I forgot to put my, I think you're right. I think that we are a city with very tight boundaries. We probably had our one big Section 106 site. We are going to have to look at acquisition, refurbishment, that type of thing, because we've really got nowhere else to go. And if we are going to, but every option needs to be reviewed because it's complicated, and particularly if there's third-party owners involved. If it's a property for sale, it's a different matter because somebody wants to sell it. So obviously, clearly, that's an easier route than something that's the owner, pension fund or whatever, is leaving empty, and may not even be, it may not even be converted for residential anyway. So it may not be able to be converted to residential because of all the regulations. So there's a lot of pros and cons. We'll present that whole argument, and really it's likely to be a mix and match of a lot of options. Some may be, I'll get to spoil the fun for the excitement in July, but we need to, the key thing the council needs to do, and with its partners, is to work out how it's all going to be financed, because we don't have a capital budget at the moment. Do we then make decisions on some sites where we have the possibility of a commuted payment and think actually we can do more with this commuted payment and it capitalises us? So there's all those decisions need to be made, but and there are opportunities potentially to, where we're buying properties cheap, for example, or have the option to buy properties a lot cheaper because we can lever in grant through the LAFH fund, which is quite generous because it's a fixed sum. It's not a percentage of property value. So we can use that to generate. I mean, I know we're talking about housing people, which is a primary thing, but we do still need to talk about things like realising revenues, because we're going to be building more or developing more if we can generate more revenue to do that. So, I mean, we're sort of in a bit of there are things happening at the moment we can't really report on now. We will report on in the next committee cycle. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. I find it really interesting that we were talking about empty homes, and there were 700 odd empty homes, and now we're here. But I wonder if you could explain for myself and the two other councillors in the room that weren't here last committee cycle, about art consultancy and their role within it, who they are, and what they're doing for City Council, please. Thank you.
Do you want me to take that one? Because I've arrived post-ARC.
I'm happy to take that one, Chair. So we appointed ARC probably 24 months ago, and perhaps a bit more beyond that, to review what the council's existing approach was to enabling the development of social housing, with a view to basically, looking under all the cracks and crevices, behind the sofa, is what we were doing fit for purpose, and how could we do it better? So they did a piece of work for us. They engaged with lots of stakeholders. There were member sessions held as well. And what they produced was a housing enabling strategy for us, or a sort of a review into that function that then informed what we've now got, which is our housing enabling strategy. We haven't retained them, but we certainly benefited from their involvement. They're a sort of hugely sort of broad church in respect of housing experience. And there were good relationships that were built up. Obviously, there are procurement rules around whether we would need to use them again, but they're certainly a good source of information and expertise. But that piece of work has now come to an end, and we've got no current work in place with them.
Okay, thank you, Lloyd. Any other contributions, questions? Okay, no, time's moving on, as it always does, strangely. Notice that time tends to move on, doesn't it? Yeah, just me again. Thank you again, James, for the report and doing what you can to overcome a very difficult challenge, trying to get more affordable homes. Because whilst there's a lot of information there, ultimately what we all want is more affordable homes. That's the big target, and it's obviously very tricky. I don't know whether I'll still be around in July for when you present actions, but I'd still like to know what those actions will be, even if I'm not a councillor. I just wanted to ask a quick question about the Registered Provider Liaison Group, which meets quarterly, where presumably you personally are having a dialogue with providers. I wonder whether you could give a really, really brief overview of how those meetings pan out, how much influence we actually have as a council to persuade people to build more affordable homes, or whether it's a bit of a talking shop and they can do what they like. Do we have influence? And this last one, 4.16 challenges, the challenges for building more affordable homes, they've increased recently. Why is that? So two questions: Registered Provider Liaison Group, how much influence, and the challenges for affordable housing, why have they increased recently?
In terms of the first one, the Registered Provider Liaison Group, I think it's useful. It's split into two sections. So we have an operational section and we have a development section. So the operational section is useful in itself because obviously they are, registered providers are managing, social stock in the city, affordable stock in the city. So we are able to talk to their housing management staff, and who we don't generally speak to that, or don't have the same level of dialogue. In terms of what influence do we have, yes, you're right. I'm not going to sit here and say none, but obviously they have their own business models, and some of our big registered providers, they're covering significant geographical areas. Our biggest provider platform who have been mentioned, you know, I knew them from where I was last in South of Nottingham. You know, so they're covering the whole of the Midlands. And that's not uncommon as registered. We're just one local authority they deal with. And we're not a big local authority, and we don't have significant land. Obviously, as Shrub Hill comes forward, I suspect we will see more of them. But at the moment, you know, I don't think it's any secret that the local authority influence. And when you go into the combined authority world, and you know, you devolved authorities, etc., there will be far more influence. But for us, not really. What is useful about that meeting, it doesn't happen that often, I think, is it's an hour with some fairly senior, so we get to understand what the high level issues are and what they're being told by government through Homes England or by the social regulator that we're not always in the loop with. So I think that's interesting. But yes, you're right. In terms of why it's become more challenging to deliver affordable housing, well, I hope to have covered that in my context, but I think that since we've had obviously interest rates have gone up to 5.25%, obviously that reflects through in terms of individuals' mortgages, but also in terms of registered provider mortgages. So the amount they borrow, and for the local authority as well, the borrowing rate, the level the local authority can borrow at is now around 5%. You know, going back 2 years ago, it's about 2.5%. So to finance their development is becoming more and more difficult. Also, as I've said, their construction itself is becoming, obviously there's construction inflation, but there's also supply chain issues in terms of availability. So if you're developing your own site, getting the raw materials in is problematic. The other problem is labour, getting labour in. It's not just trades, it's also professional services, and they're becoming more expensive. So all those factors, there's not enough people to work on development sites. There's limited professional services. You know, if you want site signed off by, building control, it's getting all those professionals in place. Same with utilities, all those complicated factors. It is more difficult for development in general. It's more expensive, and the infrastructure around it, both trades and supply, is more difficult.
Thank you. Just for bringing Councillor, I just think it's important to sort of emphasise that, because otherwise someone from outside looking in will look at the strategy and go, well, you're not building enough houses, come on council. But actually working within the wider context, that's why we're struggling, because of those factors you've just described. So thank you. I'm keen to move on to the last item, but you did raise your hand.
Hopefully, just very, very briefly, with the affordable housing, does it take account in any way of the running costs of a house? So when you're looking to buy new houses, are you looking to get the higher end of EPC and better facilities, or is that not? Is it affordability only based on the cost of purchase, not on the running costs?
For a registered provider, for new build, and for grant-funded accommodation, there are targets set around energy efficiency. There's what you call the Future Home Standard that all registered providers must adhere to. And they're required to bring their existing stock up to EPC C, aren't they? So they won't be buying anything below EPC, and they should be buying stuff at EPC A and B. And a lot of registered providers won't take properties with gas now. They have to be insulated standards with air source heat pump. In fact, the scheme at the Stonewater scheme's got all that in place. It's got the air source heat pump with the insulation, which of course you need with an air source heat pump, to be honest. But with a new property well insulated, they do work pretty well. So yes, is your answer. In terms of acquisition, you know, you kind of, if we're going to lever in grant from Homes England, we will have to meet certain standards in terms of energy. They won't be as high as new build because feasibly you're not going to get there, but we will be expected, or an RP will be expected through an acquisition scheme to deliver refurbishment to the property to a certain standard. I mean, it won't be lower than EPCC.
Thanks again, James. Thanks, everyone. So, yeah, we are noting the contents of the reports on the Housing Enabling Strategy 23-26 and noting that a further report will be presented to this committee later this year. Might have a very different membership by that point, but we're noting it anyway. So, just looking for nods of heads. Yep. Perfect. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks again, James. And finally, but not leastly, we're going to discuss a review of public space protection orders, otherwise known as PSPOs, at 5 to 10. It's the least contentious item on the agenda. Shall we be done in 5 minutes? Excuse me, Warwick Neal is going to lead on this one. Shall we crack on? Okay, hopefully she won't be too long. Yeah, carry on. Thanks, Warwick.
Thank you, Chair. I hope councillors have had the opportunity to read the number of appendices with this report, and apologies for bringing all three PSPOs through as one report. We did feel that this was for the benefit of the engagement of the community rather than the benefit of officers and councillors for it to encourage engagement. So I will base the assumption of the presentation that most of the appendices have been read and digested. So just draw your attention to the background. The PSPOs, Public Space Protection Orders, as already mentioned, were created a number of years ago, depending on which of the three we're going to look at. These Public Space Protection Orders are intended to be limited to a maximum of 3 years to ensure that they are appropriate. And the three PSPOs that are due to expire this calendar year are the City Centre PSPO, the Dog Control PSPO and the Alcohol one. The City Centre is due to expire at the end of this calendar month. The Dog Control is due to expire in the 5th of July 2024 and the Alcohol one on the 13th of August, the 12th of August 2024. So the detail of what these orders contain is in Appendix 1. So bear with me as I scroll down to Appendix 1 and give you time to also find that page on page 13 of the appendices report, or the additional report. So the City Centre PSPO includes the prohibition of intentionally feeding gulls. No person at any time shall provide or deposit food for the intention that it is consumed by gulls. It's prohibition on aggressive begging. This is where someone is loitering or approaching people within 5 metres of a cash machine or similar locations, intimidating and threatening visitors, local residents, and engaging language or gestures to encourage payment, or any other behaviour that's in relevant circumstances a reasonable person would regard as intimidating. And then the other element of that city centre report is prohibition of dangerous cycling and skateboarding. This is a designated area in the city centre and it's regarded as dangerous is a manner that may put others at risk, including travelling at excessive speed or travelling without paying due care and attention to others or conditions pertaining at the time. Then we have the alcohol PSPO, which is purposes to prohibit the consumption of alcohol or having an alcohol container within a restricted area. And that is to desist the activity where an officer may confiscate the alcohol or the container from an individual on the basis that they're either causing or perceived to be about to cause antisocial behaviour. And then finally, dog control PSPO. This is regulating dogs within the whole city district authority rather than a particular zoned area. And this is for the removal of feces by a person in control of a large, in charge of a dog. Sorry, and the dog must be. And there's also caveats around exclusion areas for dogs, and the maximum number of dogs walked by one person at a time. This order doesn't apply to assistance dogs. Scooting back up to section 3, you can see that we have consulted and summarised with stakeholders and analysed data based on enforcement and complaints received. That's set out in section 3. And I'll summarise by saying the preferred options on these 3 reports is that it is not proposed to extend the city centre PSPO. There are 3 elements we need to satisfy ourselves in putting PSPOs in place. These are that they are an identified issue with the community, either feared or of impacting people's safety or environment. They must be in a defined area and they must be appropriate, and the powers that we put in place must actually deal with the issue itself. So for the intentional feeding of gulls, after the initial combating of a couple of individuals in the city centre, we've had little or no evidence that people are continuing to feed gulls initially within the city centre. And this is linked to there is no evidence of detriment or persistence associated with the activity. We've acknowledged that the management and reducing the gull population is important for the council, and civil enforcement officers will continue to educate and monitor the issue to make sure it doesn't return, and make sure that advice isn't ignored. Furthermore, looking to more proactive measures with the Gull Forum, Worcester Bid and other partner agencies to manage food waste, which we feel is more of an issue in attracting gulls into the city centre. The aggressive begging, when we consulted with stakeholders, we found that the aggressive element of begging was an issue and maybe detract the understanding of what aggressive meant, and so may have caused underreporting or not able to understand how to report aggressive behaviour. So the stakeholders were actually saying, well, remove the aggressive, but if we did that, we may as well be just using the Vagrancy Act, and therefore there's no need for this piece of legislation specifically. The police have been acting proactively on this anyway, working with Mags Day Centre and other providers, and have been actively engaging with people that found begging on the street and proactively referring them to Mags and other services and those, therefore, in cooperation with those frontline providers, can then revert to the traditional ASB and social behaviour three-step process around individuals and criminal behaviour, rather than having a PSPO in place. And then there's dangerous cycling and skateboarding. Although it's not acknowledged that cycling and skateboarding in the city centre takes place, the existing PSPO seems to contradict with the traffic regulation order, because if it's not appropriate to ride dangerously through the city centre, that means that must be able to ride safely, which isn't the case, because the traffic regulation order means that you can't cycle between 10 and 6. So we felt that actually probably contradicted or caused confusion. As drawn to previously, we can't award fixed penalty notices to minors, so limited powers there in dealing with the problem. We felt that actually the multi-agency approach that we had earlier in sort of March, April last year, where we had numbers of young people causing antisocial behaviour in the city centre, was a much more effective approach to the PSPO itself, and felt that we had a strong partnership with the police and other officers to be able to do a combined problem-solving plan that these are called, and put those in place as and when needed, and also to apply the three-step antisocial behaviour process to individuals where required. The alcohol PSPO, we found that there is a detrimental impact on people's lives with this element, and the reflection is that more significantly for women and girls and vulnerable people. And we feel that actually without this in place, the police will have to criminalise people in order to be able to confiscate alcohol, because they can only confiscate alcohol for under 18s, or people are supplying under 18s, unless they're actually arresting them. So we felt that this was appropriate to have in place to support those people drinking in alcohol in public places, but also those identified vulnerable groups. We did find that the issue was not as relevant in Blackpool Industrial Estate and other wider communal green spaces as it had done before, and that it was no longer appropriate to continue with those areas. But we did identify issues on Pitchcroft over the last 12 months or so, and identified on the Riverside Park itself that there's street drinking going on there that was causing antisocial behaviour and upsetting members of the public. So the suggestion is that we change the boundary of the alcohol PSPO to include Pitchcroft and the Riverside Park, but to remove it from the wider geographic areas as detailed in 6.12. And then finally, the dog control PSPO, to continue with the same. We've had stakeholder feedback and suggested changes, but we feel that dog fouling is still an issue across the district, and we still feel that enforcement is needed, and that managing the number of dogs walked is still appropriate for managing dog control behaviour. But we have said that if councillors were reminded that officers could look at creating specific green spaces where dogs must be kept on short leads. So the other element to raise council awareness of is ensuring that the fines are consistent, and so not exceeding level 3 for fixed penalty notices is appropriate and justified for public space protection orders, but because some of these were created many years ago, the fine levels were slightly off, so we're just making them more consistent at £100 fine. And then just to draw your attention to 6.24 is that there's, to go with this report, an education and enforcement action plan because the PSPO, you need to make sure that people are aware of the PSPOs as well as that they're enforced appropriately. So including an action plan to take forward to reassure councillors that things are going to happen. And finally, obviously, with part of that education is signage, and where we won't be having the PSPOs, those signs need to be taken down or changed or amended or rolled out to new areas. So there is a cost attached and a budget pressure with that. So happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Warwick. Before I invite people to ask questions and make comments, I just want to thank you and your colleagues for managing to get 533 completed questionnaires, which I think is just absolutely incredible. What 0.5% of Worcester responded to this, which as a percentage sounds ridiculously small, but it's actually an incredible amount of people, which included 18 engagement events. So the level of organisation and logistics is to be applauded, so thank you very much. So lots of people, I was expecting this. I'm not going to get to Wetherspoons, am I? It's not going to happen. I didn't see the order, so Councillor Cooper, because you've been last every single time. Councillor Lamb, 2. Councillor Amos, 3. Councillor Lawrence, 4. Councillor Petrovsky, 5. And I've forgotten that order. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to make small comments on each of the sections, if that's okay. The one about gulls is very quick. I was really pleased to hear yesterday at Environment Committee that Worcester Tradeways are planning to collect food waste. I think that will really help with the gull situation. So I just kind of wanted to be a little bit full circle about that. So thank you. The PSPO cycling, yes, there's a TRO. Sometimes I cycle before 10 a.m. in the morning, and sometimes I get glares from people. And I'm cycling so sensibly and so slowly. And at the same time, there are delivery vehicles. So I think it would stop the demonisation of people trying to get to work and commute in one of the lowest forms of transport. And for alcohol, I absolutely agree. Summer 2022, there were people taking trolleys of alcohol into Gulliver Park. It was a nightmare. So I agree, it's a much more cost-effective way in terms of policing of getting alcohol off people rather than having to put them in a prison cell. I am, however, disappointed about the dog strategy. I am a dog owner. I have a beautiful 3-legged Irish Terrier who I walk amongst other places in Gulliver Park. Now, in my ward of Arboretum, we have someone who prolifically dog fouls, and it's a big problem in terms of clean-up. Residents increasingly talked about it. It's on the same few streets. It looks to be the same dog without putting too fine a point on it. I walk around these streets because I live in the ward. Back in my first committee meeting from committees, I emailed straight away asking for a solution for this, which was that bags are used and that enforcement officers could speak to a dog owner or dog walker and ask them if they had bags. This has been successfully done in lots of other places, including our neighbours in Tewkesbury and the Wyre Forest. So for the benefit of people that don't have dogs, people that walk their dogs frequently will know how many bags they need. They just need to carry an extra one. Lots of people you would have seen would have like a container with dog bags on their lead. It's much easier to catch someone and say, do you have any bags? I acknowledge that someone could have bags and still not pick up, but it's another barrier. So at the moment, we can only act if we see someone with the dog doing what it's doing and the owner not picking up. Now, officers carried out some work in my ward, on these streets, at the times that residents tell me they've seen this particular person not picking up, and they couldn't manage to catch the dog doing what it needed to do to be able to get the fixed penalty notice. So I am disappointed because I raised this back in the beginning of June, asking for this, and I'm really disappointed that I gave it that amount of time, and I asked and I flagged it up repeatedly, and it's not been considered. So thank you. Those are all my points.
Okay, Bora, did you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I'm sure it was considered. Unfortunately, it didn't make the last edit of the report, but we had considered it. There is some feedback from the Dogs Trust to say that they question the effectiveness of on-spot fines for the possession of dog poo bag, and that's on page 56. I know it's like a massive document, and there's lots of feedback. I totally get your point. Where we considered it was in the order that we've got. It states that that someone must pick up after your dog. So, and to specify that they have to have a bag, you then have to legally define what a bag is, and it gets more detailed. Where actually we say, well, you have to pick up after your dog if you're the responsible owner. So we felt that it was adding a complexity to the order that we didn't need, because we felt that you had to be able to pick up after your dog. And defining a bag was a bit, let's say, more detailed and complex than the order already provides for. So that was the reason. It was the sort of legal reflection, and also the complication of then enforcing it, and then having the feedback from the Dogs Trust to say that they didn't recommend it either. So apologies that didn't get discussed in the document, but we did consider that element.
Thank you both. Councillor Lamb.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, again, I've been on this council long enough to remember the flurry of these PSPOs which were introduced about 3 years ago, and the times they are changing, because the balance of the council has changed very dramatically since then. And at the time when they was introduced, especially the city centre PSPOs, there were a number of concerns raised by councillors about the motivations and the justifications for the introduction of these things. And it always struck me at the time there was a certain amount of political theatre here. We were sort of building up straw men to a certain extent, because I wasn't ever convinced at the time that gulls, intentionally feeding gulls, aggressive begging and dangerous cycling and skateboarding were really the most important and most prevalent problems facing the council. I always thought these were things that had been blown out of proportion, to be honest with you. And at the time, again, some of the imagery used, even now when I walk around Worcester, and I see those signs about aggressive begging, and I thought, is this the kind of imagery? We're trying to get people to come to Worcester, and you get off the train, and this is the first sign you see, and you think, okay, this isn't a particularly welcoming city. And to be fair, what's been good about having these in place for 3 years is it's now shown how ineffectual and meaningless they really are, to be honest with you. It was always concerned with, sort of picking on sort of these phantom problems rather than dealing with effective laws. So I really, really do support these recommendations. I think the alcohol one is justified. I think the dog control one is still justified. It's really good how culture has changed. I'm old enough to remember the 70s, where, dogs fouled all the time, and it wasn't an issue that was quite literally picked up on. But now, the culture has changed, and it is by exception. It is, you notice it all the more because it is an exception. So I think, continually to, sort of crack down on this is acceptable. But certainly the city centre PSPO, all the evidence here, and it's really great to have that body of evidence behind it. I just think it's not needed anymore, to be honest with you, and I'll be glad to see it go, to be honest with you.
Right. Thank you, Councillor Lamb. Did anyone want to come back on that? No. Councillor Amos.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Perhaps I could just raise two, the gulls and the cycling one. I support the recommendations as regards the others. Just very quickly on the dog one, I was going to write to an officer, but I can raise it now. Between Winchester, in my ward, between Winchester Avenue and Pitmarston Road, there is an alley called Dog Poo Alley, which is an utter disgrace. I went to see it 2 days ago. Dog mess on either side and even in the middle where you were walking. This is a main thoroughfare from Pitmarston Primary School to where people live on the other side of Pitmarston Road. It is disgusting. So if we're going to have a dog order, it needs to be enforced, please, because people are now sick and tired. Many kids, when they get to school, the teachers have to take their shoes off and the kids have to walk around on the carpet because the shoes are covered in dog's mess. Obviously, they can't be brought into the building. So if we're going to have them, please let's enforce them. So if we come on to the gull one, well, I suppose this is kind of inevitable, really, isn't it? The council has never taken the problem of gulls seriously, and we now have more gulls in the city than ever before. And of course, the gulls are now a problem throughout the city, not just the city centre, but throughout. And you cut the budget for gull control by 50% last month. So what we're sending out is a message that it's not an important problem and it doesn't matter and we're not going to do anything about it. That's the message that's sent out. And the other thing that concerns me on that one, Chair, is that we have consulted. Everybody's talked about consultation. But then if you look at the consultation, I don't know why we bothered, because we've totally ignored it. Look at the questions. Intentionally feeding gulls in Worcester city centre is a big problem. Look at the figures, it's around about 80% agree with that. We need to prohibit intentional feeding of gulls. About 90% agree with that. Those who intentionally feed gulls to, the code copy is dreadful, should be issued with fixed penalty notices. About 80% plus again, and persistent offenders should be prosecuted, about 80%. So we consulted people, absolute, very clear responses from people, and we totally ignored them. So why do we bother? If we can come on to the second one, and that is a question I'd like an answer to, please, Chair, later on. The second one, the final one I want to talk about, is just the cycling and skateboarding. And just before anybody gets too carried away, let me say, as I've always done, the vast majority of cyclists are responsible and law-abiding people. The vast majority of motorists are responsible and law-abiding people. So we're dealing with a certain group who think they can do what they want when they want. And just as also, let me start by saying, I'm just as proactive when miscreant motorists act selfishly and dangerously. My record of what I've been doing on speeding and parking in my own ward and division is well known. So if motorists break the rules, I do what I can to assist. And if cyclists break the rules, again, I do what I can to insist. The problem with all this, Chair, is that there's no enforcement. No enforcement at all. And this is why, when we're discussing these things, is it worth pursuing any of them if we don't enforce it? And that's not my view, Chair. If you look at page 27, when you look at the people's comments, the top 3 comments from people, look at them, needs more enforcement. Needs more enforcement for bikes and skateboards specifically. Number 3, should include electric scooters. That's what the public is saying. That's what the consultation has said. But we've totally ignored that because we're actually going to get rid of the PSPO that deals with it. I mean, again, why waste money? Why ask people and do deliberately the opposite? It really is just simply not on. Now, can I just remind you, Chair, and others, that a pedestrianised zone is set up for pedestrians. That's why it's called a pedestrianised zone. That means moving vehicles should not be there. I actually spent, Chair, you may have remembered, because I think you were on the council at the time, 2 years extending the pedestrianised zone hours. In other words, to keep cars out and moving vehicles out for longer. And we've now got the hours of 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. It took 2 years to do that. So to say I'm just blatantly pro-car is not the truth. We're trying to create a pedestrianised zone where pedestrians can feel comfortable and safe. That's what it's about. In other words, a safe haven for pedestrians. They don't have to keep looking over their shoulder to see if there's something coming up behind them. And the other reason, Chair, we need the PSPO to stay in place is precisely because the police are not doing their job and they don't enforce the TRO. the traffic regulation order. They do not enforce them. I've told them about Deliveroo drivers and other, riders and others. They're not going to do anything about it. They're abdicating their responsibility like they do on so many other things. So that's the situation, Chair, on that, isn't it? And can I just ask, through you, Chair, as well for an answer, paragraph 6.8 is bizarre. I mean, frankly, it's arrant nonsense. It actually says that the existing PSPO wholly contradicts the TRO of the County Council, which is also in place for the city centre, which restricts access by bicycle between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. I mean, what arrant nonsense. They're complementary. They're complementary. You have the council enforcing, well, in this case, not enforcing a PSPO, and you have the police not enforcing a TRO. So if you don't have, so they're complementary. One supports the other. How on earth can one contradict? They're there to assist each other, but since we're not enforcing either, we have the problem we've got. So it comes back to enforcement. I just read out what the public said on the consultation. There is no enforcement. So I will simply conclude, Chair, by saying whatever PSPO we carry on with, if we don't enforce them, don't let's extend them tonight. The one on cycling and skateboarding, I think it's a great pity because the message you're sending out is cycling, skateboarding, whatever, into pedestrianised zone, called pedestrianised, I've got to repeat that, is acceptable, it's okay, we're not going to do anything about it, so just cycle through and the police turn a blind eye. The council's actually going to get rid of any pretence of enforcing anything, and therefore cyclists and pedestrians do not mix any more than pedestrians and motorists mix. This is why I spent all that time trying to keep cars out of the city centre. I didn't keep cars out of the city centre just so you can then put cyclists and skateboarding, electric scooters back in. And that's the view, Chair, as I've told you on the consultation. And I can conclude by reminding the committee, because nobody's referred
This is your
about
second
the
conclusion.
thing,
So
where it
can you
talks
make
about-
it your last?
Sorry?
It's your second conclusion. Can you make it
Yeah,
your last?
I haven't detained the committee very long tonight, Chair, so I'll finish in the way I like, if you don't mind. It's just reminding the committee of what the public have said on the consultation. It says on dangerous cycling and skateboarding. Dangerous cycling and skateboarding is a big problem for the city centre. About 80% agree. We need to prohibit dangerous cycling and skateboarding in the city centre. 90% agree. People who cycle or skateboard dangerously should be issued with a fixed penalty notice. About 80+% agree. Persistent offenders should be prosecuted. About 80% plus agree. And we're going to vote tonight to ignore all that. So why are we wasting our time?
Okay, thank you. There's a lot there. I think you raised a valid point about, whether you adhere to the outcome of the consultation. So I'd be interested to hear an officer view on that. And we're going to have to extract some more questions from that monologue. So, Lloyd.
So I'll try and boil that down to three simple answers, Chair. So undertaking the consultation is just one part of reviewing a PSPO. What you can't do is place 100% reliance on it. We obviously have to take it into account, but that's not the only part of the review. The first question, I think, was raised around the feeding of gulls and the support there was within the consultation process. Just because there was support for it, so that's one indication, but there are some legal tests that we then have to meet. Is it an issue? Are there other powers in place that can deal with it? So the officer opinion is that there isn't much feeding of gulls going on in Worcester City Centre. The challenges that we've got with gulls are related to other far more important matters, not people feeding gulls. The other thing, just to reassure you, Councillor Amos, is that there are alternative powers to be able to deal with people who are feeding gulls. So littering, community protection notices. So just because we may not include it within a PSPO doesn't mean that we can't tackle that activity. The second point, Chair, around the need for the cycling and skateboarding PSPO to be in place because the County Council TRO isn't being enforced, that is not the legal reason for us to put a PSPO in place. And again, I would respectfully suggest that if the substantive County Council traffic regulation order is not being enforced, that's not a matter for the City Council, unfortunately. That's a matter for the County Council to take up with the enforcement agency. who is the police. And then just the last point around whether or not they're complementary or conflicting, I think our opinion is the perception is that if we've got a PSPO in place that allows cycling in a safe way, that completely undermines the County Council traffic regulation order, because that means that there can be no cycles within that pedestrianised area. So hopefully that sums up the three key points that I picked up, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to touch on aggressive begging first. Given that, that if a citizen is being asked, or a visitor to the city is being asked to report to the police if they think there's and they expect the police to come under the Vagrants Act, what's the likelihood the police would actually attend, given that we've even called them to the city when we've had concerns and they've said they may or may not have come, and that the city police station is shut from 5 o'clock in the evening. So where would these police be coming from? And that if the police aren't about because they aren't about, and somebody was to turn to one of our CEOs, what would their response be if there's no PSPO to enforce? Is there going to be some sort of support from our civil enforcement officers? They're stood there, they're in a uniform, people might expect support. So would that be something that they could look for if we haven't got a public order in place? That's one.
Let's take that one, yeah.
Yeah, so I think there were two questions. I think the first one strays into policing resource, which isn't a matter for this committee. But what I would advise that if anybody feels immediately threatened for their health, their safety and their welfare, then that's a 999 call, isn't it? And the police would hopefully respond with blue lights. If it isn't a matter of that seriousness, then it would be 101. And, you know, I can't speak on the police's behalf. All our staff, including our enforcement staff, are aware, through the work across the teams, the housing service and the enforcement service, what the sort of support routes are for rough sleepers and homeless people. So I would hope that if a CEO is engaged around that sort of matter, they would know where to report that back into the housing service, so we could pick that up as part of our outreach work.
So they could expect some sort of response, and just a reinforcement of someone being there that's in a uniform that would perhaps support their case. And my other point was then the dog control, 6.622. You mentioned about the sort of dogs and playing areas. If a playing area isn't defined because it hasn't got fencing around it, would you still consider that to be a playing area? Because this is a concern that I've had raised with me, that there's dog fouling and loose dogs in playing areas, but we can't afford as a city to put a fence around it.
Yeah, go on then, go on.
So we do have to, well, the way it's applied at the moment through city services is that it is the enclosed play area. So it's a defined boundary you're crossing, where they've got, and they are all signed at present. So yeah, where you've got passive boundaries, like it's part of a green space, then yes, that isn't an excluded area that we can enforce at present. Hence why to potentially diversify who can use open spaces and when. The suggestion is that we look at identifying particular public parks where we keep dogs on short leads.
I think that would be a really good idea. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you both. Councillor Petrovsky.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll try to be brief. First of all, I'd like to pay tribute to, it must have been an immense amount of work that has gone into this, and I think I've said this before. If anyone wants to learn how to write an equality impact assessment, they should talk to Warwick. I think it's detailed. I think it's evidence-based. I think it's multidimensional as well in terms of providing a broad evidence for the recommendations. I'd like to also say something about public speakers today, because I think they've made very good points and well-informed contributions, and I think it sort of it gives me a sense of pride as well that it has, for a while now, it has been a two-way dialogue rather than people coming here, saying something and then being sort of ignored by the council. So I'm really, really pleased that all three public speakers raised valid points on the matters discussed on the agenda, including the PSPOs, which were very cogent and informative. I think some of those public PSPOs, specifically the city centre one, sort of talks. I think it's more about culture wars rather than the image that we want to create for the city. I think Councillor Lamb summed it up very, very well, and it just sends a wrong signal. There's all kinds of societal, political, and other elements that contribute to issues which are then symptomized by things like people living on the streets or begging, and that's a, you know, no level of enforcement is going to solve those issues. One quick question on the alcohol one and the suggestion to increase the fine to £100. So how is it going to impact people who are addicted to alcohol, and probably some of them can't afford to pay that anyways? Is that going to criminalise the behaviour further? Just a clarification on that.
So I'm not aware of the police actually issuing any fixed penalty notices around the alcohol PSPO. It's mainly about that confiscation to de-escalate in a situation. It gives them that opportunity to, as I mentioned before, this actual PSPO stops people being criminalised, because if we didn't have it, they'd have to arrest them to de-escalate a situation. So this particular PSPO is all about the confiscation to de-escalate and stop things getting worse. It is about one of the complicated. We always by trying to manage the actual problem rather than creating blanket PSPOs. We do create a bit of a nuance on this one, because it is you are allowed to drink in public open space. We want people to be able to enjoy alcohol in our public open spaces. It's only when they are causing a nuisance or disturbing behaviour that this one comes into force. So it then also creates a bit of a signage problem in trying to interpret that message. But this means that police can engage with people in a particular location, manage the issue before it escalates, really.
Chair, just to answer Councillor Wachowski's question directly, so non-payment of an FPN is potentially a criminal offence. Somebody can be taken to court for it. However, and at the moment that is the case. I think the fine at the moment is £60. The recommendation is that we, for consistency purposes, bring all fines up to the same level for each PSPO. For somebody who may be suffering with alcoholism, or who may have issues with around paying a fine, there would be support measures in place for them. So that would be taken into account as part of any enforcement action. That wouldn't simply be ignored. And hopefully that reassures Councillor Petrosky.
Sorry, yeah, just to clarify that the way the police work is, if they're not paying the FPNs and there's a number racking up, they'll look at behaviour orders, which is obviously diverting to support services and that sort of thing.
Okay. Yep. Councillor Wilmot.
Thank you. Can I just ask, please, what are the thresholds that were applied as to determine when something was serious enough to fall under the remit of a PSPO? So, for example, in my ward in Nunnery, we've got an alleyway between Lidl and the housing estate where people notoriously will go load up on alcohol, spend huge amounts of time sort of intimidating and, sort of not just in terms of their behaviour, but with the significant amount of litter that comes with it, which is in some cases knee-high. So whilst I appreciate that it's about the escalating imminent behaviour, there are other behaviours that are also a nuisance. So I'm just interested in the kind of thresholds that are applied to nuisance behaviour to determine whether it's relevant for a PSPO or whether it's covered under different legislation.
So, so we normally rely on partners and evidence, and so in that situation, we'd rely on the police evidence. And unfortunately, obviously, as part of this consultation, it was fed back about that particular alley. We needed that police corroboration, and unfortunately, there wasn't any sort of recorded evidence to that date, because obviously it was. We were engaging with them about sort of, did you know this was an issue, and it wasn't at the time. So we did speak to the police about engaging and reassuring. So I'm happy to revisit that to make sure that has happened with the residents, and definitely it's about identifying you know, the impact and making sure that any issues are reported. I know that's a challenge with some residents, but whether there are other ways of reporting, but obviously encouraging 101 reports either online or over phone. And working, we can obviously look at multi-agency approaches, because it's much better to do a multi-agency approach and solve it rather than going through quite a legislative process to provide the same thing. So more than happy to come back to you with, or to feedback whether the residents still find that a concern. If so, we can go back to the police and sort of find out what's going on. And certainly we can work with our city cleansing guys to feed back on cleansing issues, to obviously then add that extra evidence of what's going on in those locations. They should be reporting needles and those sorts of things anyway as part of our standard operational work, so it'll be interesting if we've got those sorts of reports.
Thank you. I think part of the problem is that the largest accumulation of litter are just on private land, so falls out with the jurisdiction of the council.
Okay, any more for any more? Are you sure? Yes, go ahead, Councillor Amos.
Are you in trepidation, Mr. Chair, that I might ask something that they can't answer? Well, this is a simple one. This is a simple one, Chair. Paragraph 6.9 says FPNs that can be issued for non-compliance with the existing PSPO cannot be issued to minors. Officers have no legal powers to stop moving traffic. If that is the advice now, why was that advice not given when, a few years ago, we introduced a PSPO on a cross-party vote? If it's totally unenforceable, were we not told then that it was unenforceable? And I know it hasn't been enforced, but you can't have it both ways. If it's not enforceable, why did we introduce it in the first place?
Chair, I'm going to put myself on the line and say that we did make members aware of those challenges within the original report. I think we always knew there were going to be practical difficulties with enforcing that PSPO, but at the time, you know, that was the momentum. But I'm almost sure that we did make those issues aware within the decision report.
Okay, well, we can dive into the archives and prove who's right later on, I guess.
You'd have to speak up. Either I'm getting deaf or the acoustics are bad. Hopefully it's the latter.
Losing, not the will, the energy. We'll have to dive into the archives to see which of you is correct. Because obviously, one of you is correct and one isn't. We'll have to do that later. Councillor Lawrence.
Very, very quickly. Given the amount of time that Warwick spent on this, could we look at these individually when we're voting, because otherwise it's all just going to get a horrible mess.
I'm glad you said that, because I was actually going to ask truly whether we could do them individually as opposed to en bloc, yeah, because they're quite different. So yeah, it looks like we're coming to a vote on each of the 4 recommendations. Just put my tuppence worth in. Yeah, I think, well, really just echoing what Councillor Lamb said, you know, evidence of a problem versus perception. Are we inflating issues? And then therefore devoting resources to those issues when we could be devoting resources to more serious problems. So evidence versus perception and making a welcoming city. It's a fine line between enforcement and encouragement, but I do think on balance that these recommendations are the right ones. They will challenge unruly behaviour, but they'll also ensure that the city is a welcoming and safe place. We'll take, I'm just looking at officers for reassurance here. Take number 1, first of all. So noting the contents of the report, essentially, and the review that has been undertaken. All those in favour of recommendation number 1? Number 2 is to extend the alcohol public space protection order. Yeah, that's number 2. Number 3 is to discontinue all elements of the city centre public space protection order, which is due to expire later this month. All those, just going to ask that, all those against?
Can I have my name recorded, please, Chair?
You want your name recorded? Are you insisting that we all go around saying for and against? Oh, just checking, as I said, energy levels, yeah. Thank you. Number 4 is to grant an extension and variation order with regards to the dog control public space protection order with no changes. So all those in favour of that one?
Yes, that's unanimous.
No. Thank you very much, everyone. It's almost 11:15. Nothing's been brought to my attention in terms of AOB, any other business. So thank you all councillors, officers and members of the public. It's been a long meeting, but hopefully a productive and entertaining one. Thank you.